If you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review makes an enormous difference in reaching new listeners. And if you feel like it, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're tuning in from. We absolutely love seeing our global community and where everyone is listening. If you enjoy these deep dives into the unexplained, please consider subscribing. It means everything to us. Now, let's begin. The world did not end on December 21st, 2012. There were no fireballs, no floods, no moment when the sky split open and reality collapsed. When that date passed, people laughed nervously, relieved. Doomsday preppers packed away their supplies. Media outlets ran retrospectives on the hysteria. Life continued, and yet, if you pay attention, if you listen carefully to conversations in coffee shops and late-night forums, you'll hear something else. A persistent whisper, a shared unease. Something did happen that day. Not an explosion, not a catastrophe. Something quieter. Something that changed the texture of existence itself. This is the investigation into 2012. The year reality quietly ended. Chapter 1. The date that would not go away. December 21st, 2012. Say the date aloud and watch what happens. Some people will smile dismissively. Others will pause, their expression shifting to something harder to read. A few will tell you they remember exactly where they were that day, waiting for something they couldn't quite name. The date entered global consciousness years before it arrived. It appeared in documentaries, disaster films, best-selling books. Governments issued statements about it. The History Channel built entire programming blocks around it. For a date that, supposedly, meant nothing, it consumed an extraordinary amount of cultural attention. The origin point was specific: the Mayan long count calendar. This ancient timekeeping system, developed by one of Mesoamerica's most sophisticated civilizations, measured vast cycles of time. The long count tracked a period called a baktoon, roughly 400 years in length. 13 baktoons formed a complete great cycle, spanning approximately 5,125 years. According to this system, the 13th baktoon was scheduled to end on December 21st, 2012. Mainstream archaeologists and Mayan scholars were consistent in their interpretation. The end of the 13th baktoon represented a cycle completion, not a termination. It was analogous to an odometer rolling over, a calendar resetting to begin counting again. Ancient Mayan texts that survived Spanish conquest made no mention of apocalypse. They described transition, celebration, the beginning of a new era. But something about this explanation never satisfied the public imagination. The date appeared too perfect. The winter solstice, the alignment of calendrical systems, the convergence of ancient prophecy with modern anxiety. Conspiracy theorists noted something scholars rarely emphasized. The Maya didn't randomly select this date. They calculated it with astronomical precision, tracking celestial movements across millennia. These were people who understood cosmic cycles with accuracy that rivaled modern science. Why would such an advanced civilization mark this specific moment unless it represented something significant? The question spread through internet forums, alternative media, and eventually mainstream news. What began as fringe speculation became unavoidable. December 21st, 2012 transformed from an archaeological curiosity into a global phenomenon. Hotels in sacred sites sold out years in advance. Spiritual tourists booked trips to Mayan ruins. Survival supply companies reported record sales. But perhaps most telling was what happened in the final weeks before the date. A strange calm settled over the discourse. The jokes became less frequent. The dismissal sounded less confident. People who claimed not to believe in anything supernatural found themselves checking the news more often, watching the sky with unexplained attention. And when the day arrived, when December 21st, 2012 finally came, the world held its breath. Nothing visible happened, no earthquakes, no solar flares, no cosmic intervention. The sun rose and set. Life continued exactly as before, or so it seemed. Chapter 2. Ancient Knowledge Reinterpreted. To understand what might have actually occurred in 2012, we need to reconsider how ancient cultures understood time itself. Modern Western thought treats time as linear. We move from past through present into future, a one-way arrow with clear directionality. History progresses, technology advances, civilization evolves forward. But the Maya thought differently. So did many ancient cultures. The Mayan concept of time was cyclical, recursive, eternally returning. They didn't see history as a line, but as a spiral, repeating patterns on ever larger scales. The end of one cycle didn't mean destruction. It meant transformation, the completion of one pattern and the beginning of another. This understanding appears across multiple ancient traditions. Hindu cosmology describes vast cycles called yugas, ages that span hundreds of thousands of years. Each yuga represents a different quality of consciousness, a different relationship between humanity and cosmic truth. The cycles turn inevitably, moving from golden ages of enlightenment through progressive decline into ages of darkness, only to begin again. The Hopi people of North America speak of world ages, distinct eras separated by purification events. According to their tradition, humanity has lived through 3 previous worlds, each ending when humans fell out of balance with natural law. The 4th world, our current age, was prophesied to end when specific signs appeared in the sky and society. The ancient Egyptians tracked massive cycles called Sothic periods, tied to the heliacal rising of Sirius. They understood that celestial patterns repeated on scales that dwarfed human lifetimes. Their architecture encoded astronomical knowledge spanning millennia. What if these ancient systems weren't mythology but memory? What if cultures separated by oceans and millennia all preserve the same essential truth? Reality operates in cycles, and certain moments mark transition points between ages. The conspiracy interpretation suggests that ancient civilizations understood something modern society has forgotten. They recognize that time itself has texture, that certain moments carry different weight. December 21st, 2012, according to this view, represented a genuine inflection point. Not the end of the physical world, but the end of a cosmic cycle, a transition between ages. The question then becomes, what does it mean to end an age? If the Maya and other ancient cultures were correct about cyclical time, if reality truly does operate in patterns of completion and renewal, what would we expect to observe during such a transition? The ancient texts suggest the change would be subtle at first, a shift in consciousness, an alteration in how reality feels rather than how it looks. The external world might continue essentially unchanged, while something fundamental about perception, memory and experience transformed beneath the surface. This interpretation reframes 2012 entirely. It wasn't about predicting meteors or earthquakes. It was about recognizing a cosmic transition point, a moment when one age ended and another began. The fact that the world continued doesn't disprove the prophecy. It confirms a more sophisticated understanding. Cycles end worlds, not planets. Chapter 3. The Solar and Cosmic Context. But ancient calendars weren't the only thing pointing toward 2012. The cosmos itself seemed to be building toward something. The galactic alignment theory captured significant attention in the years leading up to the date. Proponents argued that on the winter solstice of 2012, Earth's position would align with the galactic centre, the dense heart of the Milky Way. This alignment supposedly happened only once every 26,000 years, creating a rare astronomical configuration. Mainstream astronomers disputed the specifics. Galactic alignment isn't a precise event, they argued, but a gradual process spanning decades. The Earth's precession, the slow wobble of its axis, means we move through different orientations relative to galactic features over vast timescales. December 21st, 2012 wasn't uniquely positioned in any measurable way. But conspiracy theorists asked a different question. What if precision wasn't the point? What if the alignment represented a threshold rather than a moment? A period when Earth passed through a specific region of galactic influence, exposing the planet to energies or fields that don't exist elsewhere. The galactic centre itself is a mysterious place. At its heart lies Sagittarius A star, a supermassive black hole with a mass of 4 million suns. This gravitational monster sits 26,000 light-years away, anchoring our entire galaxy in its immense field. Around it swirls a dense region of stars, gas clouds, and intense radiation. We're talking about X-rays, gamma rays, and electromagnetic phenomena that dwarf anything in our local cosmic neighbourhood. Earth's orientation relative to this galactic centre changes over vast timescales due to precession. Our planet wobbles on its axis like a spinning top, completing one full cycle approximately every 26,000 years. This precession means that the position of the Sun at winter solstice against the background of stars shifts gradually through the zodiac. In 2012, this alignment brought the winter solstice Sun into conjunction with the dark rift of the Milky Way, a region of dense interstellar dust that appears as a dark band across the galactic plane. Some researchers suggested this configuration created a unique gravitational or electromagnetic environment. The Earth, Sun and galactic centre, forming a rare cosmic alignment. Scientists remained sceptical. The distances involved are so vast that any gravitational or electromagnetic effects would be negligible. The galactic centre's influence on Earth is essentially unmeasurable. The alignment, if it even qualified as such, had no known physical mechanism to affect our planet. But the Sun's behaviour told a different story. Solar Cycle 24 began in December 2008 and reached its maximum phase around April 2014, though significant activity clustered around 2012 and 2013. This 11-year cycle represents the periodic variation in solar activity, tracked through sunspot numbers and solar flare frequency. During solar maximum, the Sun becomes violent. Its magnetic field lines twist and break, releasing enormous amounts of energy. Solar flares explode with the force of millions of nuclear bombs. Coronal mass ejections blast billions of tons of charged particles into space at millions of miles per hour. When these particle streams intersect Earth's magnetosphere, they create geomagnetic storms. The near miss in July 2012 deserves special attention. On July 23rd, the Sun unleashed one of the most powerful coronal mass ejections ever recorded. The eruption sent a massive cloud of plasma screaming through space at extraordinary velocity. But Earth wasn't in the firing line. The eruption occurred on the far side of the Sun, pointed away from our planet. However, NASA's Stereo A spacecraft was positioned perfectly to measure the event. The data revealed something terrifying. The coronal mass ejection travelled at approximately 3,000 kilometers per second, faster than any previously recorded. It carried an unusually intense magnetic field. If this storm had struck Earth, researchers later calculated it would have caused catastrophic global disruption. Daniel Baker, a space weather expert from the University of Colorado, stated in interviews that if the eruption had occurred 1 week earlier, Earth would have been directly in its path. The resulting geomagnetic storm would have been comparable to the Carrington event of 1859, when solar activity was so intense that telegraph systems worldwide sparked and caught fire. In our modern technological world, such a storm would potentially disable satellites, damage power grids, disrupt GPS systems, and cause trillions of dollars in damage. But Earth dodged that bullet by a matter of days, timing that seems almost impossibly fortunate, or perhaps deliberately arranged, if you believe the universe operates with intentionality. Beyond this near catastrophe, 2012 saw unusual solar behaviour. Multiple M-class and X-class solar flares erupted throughout the year. The Sun produced spectacular displays of activity captured by solar observation satellites. Amateur astronomers documented unusual prominence formations and coronal holes. The solar wind carried higher than normal particle density through the inner solar system. Then there's the less discussed phenomenon of cosmic ray variation. As solar activity increases, cosmic rays, high-energy particles from deep space, decrease. The Sun's magnetic field, expanding during active periods, deflects more cosmic radiation away from Earth. But the relationship isn't simple. during solar transitions, during the moments when the sun's magnetic polarity flips, which happens each solar cycle, cosmic ray penetration can actually increase temporarily. Some researchers have investigated whether cosmic rays affect cloud formation on Earth. The theory suggests that cosmic rays ionize atmospheric particles, creating nucleation sites for water vapor to condense. More cosmic rays might mean more clouds, potentially affecting climate. The mechanism remains controversial, but the correlation exists in historical data. During 2012, as the Sun approached maximum activity and its magnetic field prepared to reverse, Earth experienced unusual cosmic ray variation. Nothing dramatic enough to make mainstream news, but detectable in scientific measurements. The planet was being bombarded by slightly different radiation patterns than normal. Now consider this from a consciousness perspective. The human brain operates electromagnetically. Neurons communicate through electrical impulses. Thoughts, memories, consciousness itself emerge from electrochemical processes. We are fundamentally electromagnetic entities living within electromagnetic environments. Studies have documented correlations between geomagnetic activity and human cognition. During geomagnetic storms, reaction times slow, memory recall decreases, decision-making becomes impaired. Emergency room visits for psychiatric conditions increase. Suicide rates correlate with geomagnetic disturbances. Heart attack incidence rises during solar storms. The mechanisms aren't fully understood, but the statistical correlations are robust. Something about geomagnetic fluctuations affects human physiology and psychology. We're sensitive to these invisible forces in ways we're only beginning to measure. Researcher Michael Persinger spent decades investigating magnetic field effects on consciousness. His experiments suggested that specific magnetic field patterns applied to the temporal lobes could induce profound psychological experiences, sensations of presence, out-of-body feelings, mystical states. The brain's electromagnetic activity appears remarkably sensitive to external magnetic influences. If geomagnetic storms from normal solar activity can affect human consciousness measurably, what might happen during an extraordinary confluence of factors? Unusual solar activity, rare galactic positioning, cosmic ray variation, all occurring simultaneously during a date that ancient cultures identified as significant through completely different methodologies. Could the combination create a window of altered consciousness? A period when human perception becomes unusually malleable, when the boundary between subjective experience and objective reality thins? Not permanently, not dramatically, but enough to create a shift. A transition that most people wouldn't consciously notice but might feel as a persistent sense that something changed. The conspiracy version suggests exactly this, that 2012 represented a cosmic configuration that affected consciousness globally. The change wasn't in external reality, but in how consciousness interfaces with reality. The world continued unchanged, but human perception of that world transformed, like adjusting the tuning on a radio receiver. The signal broadcast remains the same, but what you actually hear depends on how your receiver is calibrated. Ancient cultures supposedly understood this. They recognized that certain cosmic configurations affect consciousness. They tracked these cycles and marked transition points. The Maya, with their sophisticated astronomical knowledge, calculated when Earth's position relative to galactic features would create specific conditions. They didn't predict the end of the physical world. They predicted a consciousness transition, a perceptual shift that would mark the beginning of a new age. The fact that scientists found no evidence of unusual physical effects doesn't disprove this theory. If the change operated at the level of consciousness rather than matter, conventional instruments wouldn't detect it. You can't measure a perceptual shift with a magnetometer. You can't quantify how reality feels with a spectrometer. The only evidence would be subjective. Widespread reports that existence feels different. That time behaves strangely. That memory seems unreliable. That reality itself feels less solid than before, which is exactly what millions of people have reported since 2012. Perhaps the cosmos doesn't cause apocalypses in the traditional sense. Perhaps it causes transformations, subtle recalibrations of consciousness that change how we experience existence, without altering existence itself, and perhaps ancient astronomers understood this well enough to predict precisely when such transformations would occur. Chapter 4: CERN and the God Particle. While ancient prophecies and cosmic alignments captured public attention, something else was happening. Beneath the border of Switzerland and France, something scientific, something unprecedented. The Large Hadron Collider at CERN, the European Organisation for Nuclear Research, represents humanity's most ambitious attempt to understand fundamental reality. This massive machine, a ring 27 kilometres in circumference buried 100 metres underground, accelerates particles to 99.9999%, the speed of light before smashing them together. These collisions recreate conditions that haven't existed since fractions of a second after the Big Bang. The engineering alone is staggering. The LHC contains over 9,000 superconducting magnets, cooled to minus 271 degrees Celsius, colder than outer space. These magnets guide proton beams around the ring, bending their trajectory through curved sections. At 4 intersection points, the beams cross, and particles collide with energies measured in trillions of electron volts. Detectors at these intersection points capture collision debris. Atlas and CMS, the two largest detectors, each weigh thousands of tons and contain millions of sensing elements. They record particle paths, energies, and interactions with microscopic precision, generating petabytes of data that require global computing grids to process. The LHC became operational in September 2008. The first beams circulated successfully, marking a historic achievement. But 9 days later, disaster struck. A faulty electrical connection between superconducting magnets caused catastrophic helium leakage. The resulting damage required over a year of repairs and upgrades. The machine finally returned to operation in November 2009. The delay proved fortunate in one respect. It allowed engineers to strengthen the system, to implement additional safety measures, to ensure that when high-energy operations began, the machine would be robust enough to handle unprecedented forces. By March 2010, the LHC achieved its first 7 trillion electron-volt collisions, setting a world record. The energy levels continued increasing throughout 2010 and 2011. Scientists began serious hunting for the Higgs boson, the theoretical particle that gives other particles mass. The Higgs field theory originated in the 1960s with physicist Peter Higgs and others. They proposed that space itself isn't empty, but filled with an invisible field. As particles move through this field, they interact with it, acquiring mass through this interaction. Particles that interact strongly with the Higgs field become heavy. Particles that interact weakly remain light. Particles that don't interact at all, like photons, remain massless. Without the Higgs field permeating space, matter as we know it couldn't exist. Particles would zip around at light speed, never forming atoms, molecules, or complex structures. The Higgs field is literally what makes physical reality possible. But for decades, the Higgs boson, the particle associated with this field, remained theoretical. Physicists were confident it existed based on how well the theory explained other observations, but direct evidence required energies only the LHC could achieve. The search was challenging. Higgs bosons, if they existed, would be extremely short-lived, existing for only fractions of a second before decaying into other particles. Detecting them required reconstructing these decay products backward, looking for specific patterns among trillions of collision events. 2 independent teams, operating the Atlas and CMS detectors, analysed data separately. This independence was crucial. If both teams found the same signal in different datasets using different methods, the discovery would be confirmed. Throughout 2011 and into 2012, evidence accumulated. Subtle but consistent signals appeared in both datasets. The teams remained cautious, refusing to claim discovery until statistical significance reached the 5 sigma threshold, meaning only a 1 in 3.5 million chance that the signal was random fluctuation. On July 4, 2012, CERN announced the discovery. both teams had independently confirmed a new particle with mass approximately 125 billion electron volts, consistent with Higgs boson predictions. The announcement made international headlines. Peter Higgs, present at the announcement, wept openly. After nearly 50 years, his theory was confirmed. The discovery represented one of the greatest scientific achievements in human history. It completed the standard model of particle physics, confirming the final missing piece of our understanding of fundamental forces and particles. It validated decades of theoretical work and technological development. It proved that humans could probe the deepest levels of reality through careful experimentation and analysis. But conspiracy theorists noticed the timing. December 2012, the Mayan Calendar, the end of an age. And now, just months before that prophesied date, scientists had isolated and confirmed the existence of the particle responsible for physical reality itself, the particle that literally makes matter possible. The conspiracy theory asks, what if manipulating the Higgs field changes reality? What if CERN's experiments didn't just observe fundamental particles, but actually altered something about the fabric of existence? Before dismissing this as scientific illiteracy, consider that physicists themselves have discussed similar possibilities. The discovery of the Higgs boson led to serious academic papers about vacuum stability. The Higgs field exists at a specific energy level throughout space, but some calculations suggested this might be a metastable state, like a ball balanced in a shallow valley on a hillside. The ball is stable locally. Small disturbances won't dislodge it. But the true stable state lies in a deep valley far below. If something provides enough energy to push the ball over the ridge, it will roll down to the lower, more stable state. And once it starts rolling, nothing can stop it. If the Higgs field transitioned to a lower energy state, reality itself would fundamentally change. Different physical laws would apply. Matter would behave differently. The transition would spread at the speed of light, consuming the universe, replacing one form of reality with another. Everything in the expanding sphere would be destroyed and replaced with configuration stable in the new vacuum state. Some physicists calculated that high-energy events like particle collisions might trigger such a transition. The concentrated energy at collision points could provide the kick needed to push the Higgs field over its stability threshold. If the metastability hypothesis was correct, every high-energy collision represented a tiny but non-zero chance of destroying the universe. CERN conducted extensive studies to verify that their experiments couldn't cause vacuum decay. They calculated the energy levels involved, the stability of the Higgs field, the probability of catastrophic transitions. Their conclusion, the risk was negligible. Cosmic rays strike Earth's atmosphere with far higher energies than the LHC produces, and the universe has survived billions of years of such bombardment. If high-energy collisions could trigger vacuum decay, it would have happened naturally long ago. The safety arguments are scientifically sound. But negligible isn't zero, and the calculations depend on models and assumptions that could be incomplete. Physics at these energy scales is exploratory by nature. We're probing regimes that have never existed in the history of Earth. Unknown unknowns are always possible. The conspiracy version suggests that something did happen. Not a universe-ending vacuum decay, but something subtler. A small alteration in the Higgs field, a minor adjustment in how reality manifests, not enough to destroy matter or create obvious catastrophe, but enough to change things imperceptibly but fundamentally. Enough that people might notice reality feels different without being able to articulate exactly how. Consider what the Higgs field actually does. It's not just responsible for mass, it's responsible for the specific relationship between energy and mass that makes our particular reality stable. Change the Higgs field slightly, and you change how particles interact, how forces operate, how physical law manifests at the most fundamental level. Such changes might not be dramatically visible. Matter would continue existing. Atoms would remain stable. Chemistry would still work. But subtle alterations in fundamental constants could affect how reality operates at scales we experience but don't directly measure. Time perception, consciousness. The interface between physical process and subjective, experience. Timeline coincidence fuels this speculation. The Higgs discovery in July 2012, the apocalyptic date in December 2012, the feeling that many people report something changed that year. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, like waking from a dream into a similar but not identical world. The Large Hadron Collider ran throughout 2012 at unprecedented energies. Millions of high-energy collisions occurred. Each one probed the structure of space-time at the smallest scales. Each one briefly recreated conditions that hadn't existed since the universe's first moments. What if, cumulatively, these experiments altered something? CERN maintains that their experiments pose no danger. Their safety documentation is extensive and peer-reviewed. Independent physicists have verified their conclusions. The scientific community largely agrees that the LHC operates safely within understood physical principles. But conspiracy theorists note that scientists are assessing physical danger. They're measuring whether the collider could destroy matter or cause vacuum decay. They're not asking whether it could alter consciousness, change perception, or shift humanity into a parallel timeline. Those questions aren't in their framework. They're measuring physical safety, not metaphysical effects. What if the apocalypse wasn't fire and destruction? What if it was a quiet transition, facilitated by experiments that probed the fundamental nature of reality during a cosmic window when such changes were possible? What if manipulating the particle that gives matter its properties had unforeseen effects on how consciousness experiences that matter? The experiments continue. The LHC was upgraded and restarted in 2015, reaching even higher energies. Plans exist for future colliders with even greater capabilities. We're pushing deeper into fundamental reality, learning more about how existence works at the smallest scales. But are we changing anything in the process? Are we observers or participants in reality's structure? The official answer is that we're pure observers, that scientific experiments examine what exists without altering it, that the universe operates according to fixed laws we're discovering but not influencing. The conspiracy answer suggests otherwise. That reality at quantum scales is participatory. That observation affects outcome. That consciousness and physical process are entangled in ways we're only beginning to suspect. And that experiments probing the literal foundation of physical reality might have effects beyond what conventional physics predicts. Chapter 5. Mandela Effect emerges. And then the memories began to change. The term Mandela Effect originated in 2010, coined by paranormal researcher Fiona Broome. At a conference, Broome was discussing Nelson Mandela and casually mentioned his death in prison during the 1980s. Multiple people in the conversation agreed. They shared surprisingly detailed memories, seeing news coverage, hearing about his death, even recalling his funeral. But Nelson Mandela didn't die in prison. He was released in 1990, became president of South Africa, and died in 2013. The memories were completely false, yet multiple people shared identical false memories, specific and detailed. Broome began documenting similar phenomena, large groups of people remembering things differently than recorded history. These weren't simple mistakes or confusion. They were vivid, consistent memories that directly contradicted documented reality. The term gained traction online, especially after 2012. Communities formed around cataloguing examples. Some were trivial. The Berenstain Bears children's books, which many people insisted were spelled Berenstein. Thousands of people remember the Stein spelling with absolute certainty. They recall learning to read with those books, seeing the name on covers, writing it in school reports. But every physical copy, every archived newspaper article, every documented reference shows Berenstain. Always has. The film Star Wars provides another striking example. Countless people quote the famous line, "Luke, I am your father." It's referenced in parodies, memes, casual conversation. Except Darth Vader never says this. The actual line from The Empire Strikes Back is, "No, I am your father." Luke's name doesn't appear in the quote at all, yet people don't just misquote it. They specifically remember hearing "Luke, I am your father" while watching the film. The Monopoly Man is another case. Many people vividly recall him wearing a monocle. They can describe it. A single lens over his right eye, emphasizing his wealthy tycoon appearance. But the Monopoly Man has never worn a monocle. No version of the game, no edition across decades of production, features this detail. People are confusing him with Mr. Peanut, who does wear a monocle. Yet the memory feels authentic, not like a simple confusion between two different characters. Then there are geographic memories. Thousands of people recall New Zealand being positioned northeast of Australia rather than southeast. They remember learning this in school, pointing to it on maps, discussing its location relative to other Pacific islands. But every map, historical and current, shows New Zealand southeast of Australia. Always has. South America's position creates similar confusion. Many people remember it positioned directly below North America, aligned longitudinally. But South America actually extends significantly eastward. Looking at an accurate map creates genuine shock for some people. They insist maps have changed, that South America has moved, that reality itself has been altered. The fruit company Fruit of the Loom provides one of the most discussed examples. Countless people remember their logo featuring a cornucopia, a horn of plenty overflowing with fruit. They describe it in detail, the brown woven horn, the way fruit spilled from its opening. Some recall drawing it in art class, others remember staring at it on clothing tags. But the Fruit of the Loom logo has never included a cornucopia. The company confirms this. Historical archives confirm it. Yet the collective memory persists, vivid and specific. Brand names create particularly strong Mandela effects. Many remember Looney Tunes rather than Looney Tunes. They insist Kit Kat has a hyphen when it doesn't. They recall Skechers shoes being spelled with a T when the brand is actually Skechers. These aren't vague recollections, but confident memories of seeing these spellings repeatedly, buying products with these names, correcting others who spelled them differently. Even more unsettling are the historical event Mandela effects. Some people remember Tiananmen Square ending differently, with the famous tank man being run over rather than standing his ground. Others recall different numbers of people in Kennedy's assassination car, different states in the United States, different countries existing or not existing on maps. Mother Teresa's canonization creates temporal confusion. Many people remember her being declared a saint in the 1990s, shortly after her death in 1997. They recall news coverage, church celebrations, school assemblies honouring St. Teresa. But Mother Teresa wasn't canonized until September 2016, nearly 2 decades after her death. The clear memory of earlier canonization exists alongside documented evidence that it happened much later. The Lindbergh baby case produces strange memory discrepancies. Some people recall the baby never being found, a tragic unsolved mystery. Others remember the child being found alive years later. The documented history shows the baby was found dead shortly after the kidnapping, and Bruno Hauptmann was convicted of the crime, but the alternative memories persist, detailed and confident. Movie quotes provide endless examples. Mirror, mirror on the wall from Snow White is actually magic mirror on the wall. Life is like a box of chocolates from Forrest Gump is actually life was like a box of chocolates. Hello, Clarice from Silence of the Lambs is never spoken. Hannibal Lecter says, "Good evening, Clarice." People don't just misquote these lines. They remember hearing the incorrect versions in theatres, repeating them contemporaneously with the film's releases. Psychologists offer explanations: false memory formation, confabulation, the misinformation effect. Human memory is notoriously unreliable. The brain constantly reconstructs memories rather than replaying them like recordings. Each time we recall something, we potentially alter it slightly. Memories incorporate information encountered after the original event, blending authentic recollection with later learning. Social contamination explains shared false memories. One person's error spreads through communities, becoming collectively reinforced. Someone creates a meme with a misquote. Others see it, incorporate it into their memory, then recall the misquote as if they heard it originally. The false memory becomes self-perpetuating through social sharing. Confirmation bias strengthens these effects. Once someone believes they remember something incorrectly, they seek out others with similar memories, reinforcing the false recollection. Online communities dedicated to the Mandela effect create echo chambers where incorrect memories are validated and amplified. The human brain's pattern recognition creates false memories through similarity. The Monopoly Man looks enough like Mr. Peanut that our brains merge the details. We've seen so many wealthy characters with monocles that we assign the feature to any similar character. The memory feels authentic because it's based on genuine pattern recognition, just incorrectly applied. These explanations are scientifically sound. Memory research consistently demonstrates how easily human recollections can be altered, implanted, or distorted. Elizabeth Loftus's groundbreaking research showed that entirely false memories can be created through suggestion. People can be made to remember events that never occurred, with full sensory details and emotional conviction. The Mandela effect fits comfortably within established psychological frameworks. It demonstrates known principles of memory formation, social influence, and cognitive bias. No paranormal explanation is required. But conspiracy theorists propose something different. What if these aren't false memories, but actual memories from alternate timelines? What if the Mandela effect represents evidence that reality changed, that some kind of timeline shift occurred, leaving certain people with memories that don't match current history? The timing creates the strongest argument for this interpretation. While the term originated in 2010, the phenomenon exploded in awareness and documentation after 2012. Reddit communities dedicated to cataloguing examples grew exponentially. YouTube channels discussing Mandela effects accumulated millions of views. Google search trends show dramatic increases in people researching memory discrepancies, starting in late 2012 and accelerating through the following years. The number of reported instances increased dramatically. Not just people discovering existing Mandela effects, but people reporting new ones, noticing changes they claim occurred recently. Some individuals maintain lists of things they're specifically watching, checking regularly to see if reality changes. When changes occur, they document them, comparing notes with others. The consistency of false memories is striking. If these were random errors, we'd expect variation. Different people would misremember things in different ways. But Mandela effects show remarkable consistency. Thousands of people don't just misspell Berenstain Bears differently, they specifically remember Berenstein. Not Berenstein or Bernstein or any other variation. This specific alternative spelling. The emotional conviction compounds the mystery. People experiencing the Mandela effect don't feel uncertain. They don't say, "I think I remember," or "maybe it was different." They know, with absolute certainty. The conviction is visceral, unshakable. They trust their memories completely and react with genuine shock when confronted with evidence contradicting those memories. Some report the moment of discovery as traumatic. Learning that their clear memory doesn't match reality creates profound disorientation. They describe feeling unmoored, questioning everything they know. If such a vivid, confident memory can be completely false, what else might be wrong? The experience resembles gaslighting, except reality itself seems to be the gaslighter. The conspiracy interpretation suggests that December 21st, 2012, represented a convergence point, a moment when multiple timelines merged, overlapped, or branched. Some people retained memories from previous timeline versions, others transitioned seamlessly, their memories automatically updating to match the new reality. A small percentage remained conscious of the discrepancies, their memories preserving information that no longer technically exists in current timeline documentation. This theory requires accepting enormous assumptions, that multiple timelines exist simultaneously, that they can merge or branch under certain conditions, that human consciousness somehow exists across these divisions, potentially retaining memories from parallel realities, that physical documentation updates to match the new timeline, while some neurological memories remain frozen in previous versions. From a conventional scientific perspective, it's absurd. It violates our understanding of causality, physical law, information theory. It requires rewriting fundamental physics to accommodate impossible phenomena. But from an experiential perspective, it's compelling. Because the Mandela effect doesn't feel like remembering wrong, it feels like reality itself has changed. The conviction isn't abstract or tentative, it's certainty. People experiencing the Mandela effect don't think they might be misremembering. They know, absolutely, that their memories are accurate and somehow reality is altered to not match them. Whether this represents timeline convergence, mass false memory, coordinated psychological operation, simulation adjustments, or something else entirely remains unresolved. But the correlation with 2012 is undeniable. The year the world supposedly ended was also the year people began noticing, en masse, that their memories no longer match the world around them, and the examples keep accumulating. New Mandela. Effects appear regularly. People discover discrepancies they insist didn't exist before. The phenomenon isn't static, frozen in the past. It's ongoing, active, continuously producing new instances where memory and reality diverge in ways that feel impossible to explain through normal psychological processes. Chapter 6. Psychological and Cultural Shift. Beyond specific conspiracy theories, beyond ancient calendars and particle physics, something undeniable happened after 2012. A shift in how reality feels. A change in collective psychology and cultural perception. Chapter 6.5. Voices from the Transition. Before we examine the broader cultural shift, we need to hear from the people who experienced something during the transition period. These aren't celebrity testimonies or public figures. These are ordinary individuals who documented their experiences online, in forums, blogs, and personal accounts that accumulated in the years following 2012. User Temporal Watcher on a popular conspiracy forum posted in March 2013. I know how this sounds. I know you'll think I'm crazy, but I need to document this while the memory is still fresh. On December 20th, 2012, I went to bed in my apartment in Seattle. Normal night, nothing special. I woke up on December 22nd, not the 21st, the 22nd. I lost an entire day. My phone showed the 22nd. My computer showed the 22nd. But I have no memory of the 21st at all. And here's what's strange. Nobody I've talked to has clear memories of that day either. They remember the date passing, but when I ask them what they did that specific day, they get vague. They can't recall details. It's like the day happened, but none of us actually experienced it. The post received hundreds of responses, some dismissive, others intrigued, but a significant number reporting similar experiences. Missing time on or around. December 21st. Gaps in memory that shouldn't exist. Days that passed without conscious experience. Another account from Reality Glitch dated January 2013. Ever since New Year's, everything feels wrong. I can't explain it better than that. Colours look slightly off. Not dramatically different, but like someone adjusted the saturation on reality. Sounds have a weird quality to them, like everything is being played through speakers instead of happening directly. My wife thinks I'm losing it, but she admits she feels strange too. We both feel like we're watching our lives from slightly outside ourselves. We're going through the motions, but it doesn't feel real anymore. This sensation, described as derealization, or depersonalization in psychological terms, appeared in countless accounts after 2012. The medical terminology existed before, but the prevalence of reports skyrocketed. Online searches for derealization increased dramatically, starting in early 2013 and continuing upward for years. A particularly detailed testimony came from someone identified only as Observer EST9 in August 2013. I'm a scientist. I work in atmospheric research. I'm trained to be skeptical, to demand evidence, to reject unfounded claims. But I can't explain what's been happening. Our data collection hasn't changed. Our instruments work the same. But starting in January 2013, I noticed something in the results. Nothing wrong exactly. Nothing I could point to and say, this is broken. But the patterns look different. Atmospheric behaviour that should be chaotic shows unexpected regularities. Random variations that should average out over time show persistent asymmetries. My colleagues see it too, but nobody wants to discuss it. We just note the anomalies and continue our work. But something changed in how the atmosphere behaves, or maybe in how our instruments perceive it. I can't tell the difference anymore. From Australia, user Southern Skies reported in November 2013, "I'm a night sky photographer. I've been documenting constellations for 15 years. I know the southern sky intimately, every star pattern, every deep space object visible from my location. In late 2012, I started noticing differences. Not major ones, not anything I could definitively prove, but stars that should be in specific positions appear slightly offset. The Milky Way looks different through my lens, deeper, more textured. My photographs from before December 2012 look flat compared to what I'm capturing now. Same equipment, same settings, same locations, but the sky itself looks different, more present, more real somehow, like a higher resolution version of what was there before." This observation, strange as it sounds, appeared in multiple amateur astronomy communities. People who tracked the night sky reported subtle changes in how celestial objects appeared. Not their positions, which would be measurable and provable, but their quality, their presence, how they looked through telescopes and cameras. European testimony from Clock Watcher, dated June 2014. "I've worked in a clock shop for 20 years. I repair mechanical timepieces, antique and modern. I understand how time works mechanically, how gears and springs and escapements measure duration. But ever since 2012, mechanical time and experience time have diverged. Clocks run at the same speed they always did. I can verify this objectively. But subjective time has accelerated dramatically. Days pass in what feels like hours. Weeks disappear. I'll start working on a repair and look up to find entire afternoons have vanished. My clients report the same thing. Time is moving faster, but not measurably, only experientially." Asian accounts added international perspective. From Japan, Tokyo Transit posted in April 2015. "The trains run on the same schedule, exactly the same. Japanese rail is precise to the second, but everyone feels rushed now, like we're always running late even when we're on time. The 30-minute commute that used to feel routine now feels barely adequate. We haven't changed the schedule, the trains haven't slowed down, but somehow there's less time than there used to be. Everyone feels it. We joke about it, but nobody can explain it." South American testimony from Andean Observer in September 2016. "I live in a small village in the Peruvian highlands. We're isolated from modern technology. No internet until 2015. No television for most families. But even here, people notice changes after 2012. The elders talk about it. They say the spirits feel different. The mountains look different. Not physically. But their presence has changed. The sacred sites don't resonate the same way. During ceremonies, the connection feels weaker, or maybe stronger but different. Like we're interfacing with the spiritual realm through new protocols. The old ways still work, but they produce different results." African accounts from Sahel Watcher, posted in December 2017. "I document traditional knowledge in West Africa. Oral histories, astronomical traditions, agricultural practices passed down through generations. In 2013, elders in multiple villages, completely unconnected to each other, began reporting that the seasons feel wrong. Not climate change wrong. That's a different thing they're well aware of. But wrong in a more fundamental way. The relationship between earth and sky has altered. Planting times that worked for centuries require adjustment now. Not because temperature changed or rainfall patterns shifted, because time itself behaves differently. The lunar cycles look the same, measure the same, but they feel different to people who have tracked them all their lives." Medical. Professionals notice changes too. An emergency room physician posting as night shift doc in March 2018. "I've worked emergency medicine for 12 years. You see patterns. You learn to predict volume based on moon phases, weather patterns, days of week. But starting around 2013, the patterns changed. We get surges of psychiatric emergencies that don't correlate with any known factors. clusters of patients reporting identical symptoms, but with no environmental cause, mass anxiety events where dozens of people present within hours, all describing the same feeling of impending doom, but with no apparent trigger. It's like collective consciousness occasionally spikes into panic for no medical reason. Perhaps most unsettling were accounts from children who reached awareness around 2012. User born in the shift posted in May 2019, "I was born in 2010. My first clear memories form around 2012 to 2013. I don't have before and after memories because I was too young, but everyone older than me talks about how the world feels different now than before I was born. They describe a quality to existence that I've never experienced. They say reality used to feel more solid, more present, more real. I don't know what that means because I've only ever lived in this version. But if the world genuinely feels less real to people who remember before, what does that mean for my generation? We've never experienced what they describe as normal reality. We've only ever lived in whatever this is. These testimonies, collected from various online sources over several years, show patterns, temporal distortion, perceptual changes, feelings of unreality, subtle alterations in natural phenomena that can't be objectively measured, and most significantly, the consistent dating of these experiences to during or shortly after December 2012. Skeptics would argue this represents confirmation bias. People looking for changes after a significant date, finding them whether they exist or not. The human brain is excellent at pattern recognition, sometimes too excellent, identifying patterns in random noise, but the volume and consistency of reports suggests something more. These aren't people seeking attention or building conspiracy theories. Most posted anonymously in obscure corners of the internet, simply trying to document experiences they couldn't explain. They weren't claiming alien contact or government conspiracies, just a subtle, persistent sense that reality itself had changed in ways that matter experientially, even if they can't be proven scientifically. Chapter 7. The Broader Cultural Transformation. Chapter 7. The Broader Cultural Transformation. Beyond individual testimonies lies the broader sweep of cultural transformation. Observable changes in how society functions, how people interact, how collective consciousness operates. Changes that became pronounced after 2012. Ask people about time perception, and you'll hear a consistent report. Time is speeding up. Years pass faster than they used to. Weeks disappear. The gap between January and December shrinks with each passing cycle. This isn't imagination. Studies document that modern adults experience time as passing more quickly than previous generations reported. Several factors contribute to this acceleration. Digital technology fragments attention, creating fewer distinctive memories, which makes time feel compressed in retrospect. When we experience events deeply, encoding rich memories, time feels extended in recollection. But when we scroll through social media, consuming information without deep engagement, our brains create sparse memory records. Later, when we try to remember the period, there's nothing there. The time collapses into nothing because nothing distinctive was encoded. Routine and predictability speed subjective time. Novel experiences create detailed memories that expand our sense of duration. But when every day resembles the last, when we follow the same patterns repeatedly, the brain stops encoding detailed memories. It recognizes the pattern and essentially goes into autopilot. We experience the time, but we don't remember it later. Looking back, months collapse into blur. The mechanism is well documented. It explains why childhood feels so extended while adulthood accelerates. Children experience everything as novel. Each day brings new discoveries, creating rich memory traces. Adults fall into routines and time starts slipping away. But the acceleration intensified noticeably after 2012. People began commenting on it more frequently. The sensation became a cultural meme, referenced in casual conversation, social media posts, articles about modern life. Time wasn't just passing quickly, it was rushing, accelerating, becoming almost uncontrollable. Adults in their 20s, reported feeling time slip away at rates previously described only by elderly people. The before and after boundary appeared sharp. People who came of age before 2012 remember a different relationship with time, not just slower, but more present, more tangible. Time felt like something you moved through consciously, rather than something that dragged you along whether you were paying attention or not. Alongside temporal acceleration came something darker, rising anxiety. Mental health statistics document dramatic increases in anxiety disorders, depression, and general psychological distress throughout the 2010s. Young people born after 2000 show higher rates of anxiety than any previous generation measured. The increases can't be attributed solely to better diagnosis or reduced stigma. The actual prevalence of anxiety has increased dramatically. The reasons are complex and multifaceted. Economic uncertainty plays a role. Millennials and Generation Z face job markets, housing costs, and student debt burdens unprecedented in modern history. The promise of upward mobility, so fundamental to previous generations' experience, evaporated. Young people worked harder for less security than their parents achieved. Climate change awareness contributed to existential dread. Previous generations could ignore environmental destruction or assume someone would eventually solve it. Modern young people grew up with climate catastrophe as background noise, an approaching threat that nobody seemed capable of addressing. Helplessness in the face of existential danger breeds anxiety. Political polarization intensified tribal hostilities. The internet enabled echo chambers where different groups consumed entirely different information, creating parallel realities that couldn't communicate. Societies fractured along ideological lines more severely than at any time since civil wars. The shared consensus reality that bound communities together dissolved. Social media comparison created constant inadequacy. Platforms designed to maximize engagement learn that envy and inadequacy keep people scrolling. Everyone presented curated highlights while experiencing raw reality, creating the illusion that others lived better lives. The comparison was endless and toxic. All these factors contributed to rising anxiety. But timing matters. The inflection point appears around 2012. Before that year, mental health trends were concerning but relatively stable. After 2012, the curves bend sharply upward. Something changed in the collective psychological experience of reality. Whether technological shifts, cultural transformations, or something more fundamental remains debatable. But the change is measurable and significant. Digital saturation provides partial explanation. Smartphones became ubiquitous around 2012. The iPhone had existed since 2007, but smartphone adoption crossed critical thresholds around 2011 and 2012. Suddenly, everyone had internet access in their pocket all the time. The boundary between online and offline existence dissolved. Social media shifted from supplementary to primary communication. Facebook, launched in 2004, reached 1 billion users in October 2012. Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat all reached critical mass during this period. By 2015, entire generations were living primarily through screens. Their social reality mediated by algorithms designed to maximize engagement through emotional manipulation. This technological shift created a specific type of unreality. Life began feeling performative, curated, artificial. Genuine experience became difficult to distinguish from constructed narrative. People started photographing experiences rather than having them, interrupting moments to capture content for later sharing. Reality itself started feeling less solid, more malleable, subject to interpretation and manipulation. The phenomenon of doom scrolling emerged. People compulsively consuming negative news and social media content despite knowing it worsened their mood. The behaviour was recognised as maladaptive, yet it spread like an addiction. Platforms optimised their algorithms to exploit this tendency, learning that negativity and outrage generated more engagement than positive content. Information overload created constant partial attention. Instead of focusing deeply on single tasks, people fractured their awareness across multiple streams. We could do many things simultaneously, but nothing with full presence. This fragmented consciousness became normal, expected, the default mode of modern existence. The conspiracy framing suggests that 2012 marked a transition into a qualitatively different type of reality. Not because of external events, but because of internal changes. Consciousness shifted. Perception altered. The relationship between subjective experience and objective reality became increasingly unstable, and technology accelerated and amplified this transformation. Some describe it as reality losing coherence. Events that should be significant pass with minimal impact. Catastrophes that would have defined previous generations barely register. The world feels simultaneously more intense and less real, hyperreal and unreal at the same time. We're overwhelmed with information while experiencing nothing deeply. This isn't nostalgia. It's not older people complaining that things were better in their day. Young people feel it most acutely. Those who came of age after 2012 often report that existence feels wrong somehow. Not dramatically wrong, just off. Like living in a world that's slightly out of focus, where the colours aren't quite right, where time behaves strangely and nothing feels entirely solid. The sensation defies easy explanation. It's subjective, diffuse, impossible to measure scientifically, but it's widespread. Millions of people across cultures and demographics report essentially the same experience. Reality changed after 2012. It didn't end. It transformed into something different, something less real. Cultural production reflected this transformation. Entertainment became increasingly referential, building on existing properties rather than creating new ones. Reboots, remakes, sequels, and franchises dominated media. Original stories became rare. Everything referenced everything else in endless loops of self-reference. Fiction began struggling with sincerity. Irony and meta-commentary became default modes. Straightforward emotional expression felt naive, embarrassing. Everything had to be filtered through layers of self-awareness and distancing. The genuine became nearly impossible to access or express. Architecture and design trended toward the minimalist and sterile. Physical spaces became more uniform, more corporate, more designed for maximum efficiency and minimal character. Cities that once had distinct personalities began looking identical. Every downtown featured the same chain stores, the same aesthetic, the same carefully optimized blandness. Food followed similar patterns. Despite apparent diversity, most options were variations on the same corporate formulas. Regional cuisines standardized. Authentic became a marketing term rather than a description of reality. Even farmers' markets and craft producers often sold industrially produced goods marketed as artisanal. Language itself shifted. Sarcasm and irony became dominant modes of communication. Genuine enthusiasm required careful framing to avoid seeming naive. People prefaced sincere statements with disclaimers and apologies. Emotional honesty felt risky, exposing, potentially embarrassing. These cultural shifts have explanations that don't require conspiracy theories. Late capitalism optimizes everything for profit, which tends toward homogenization and mediocrity. Postmodern irony represents intellectual sophistication, responding to previous generations' naive sincerity. Digital technology enables unprecedented cultural cross-pollination, but also creates mimetic spirals where everyone copies everyone. But the timing and totality of the transformation deserves attention. The shift wasn't gradual. It accelerated dramatically after 2012. Multiple trends converged during a narrow time frame, creating a cascade of changes that fundamentally altered how culture functions. Whether this represents natural evolution or evidence of something more unusual remains open to interpretation. Chapter 7. Simulation. Theory enters the mainstream. Around the same period, a radical idea moved from science fiction into serious philosophical and scientific discourse: simulation theory. The concept has ancient roots. Philosophers have long questioned the nature of reality, from Plato's cave to Descartes' demon. But modern simulation theory gained academic credibility in 2003 when philosopher Nick Bostrom published a paper arguing that at least one of three propositions must be true. Civilizations never reach technological maturity. Mature civilizations have no interest in running ancestor simulations, or we are almost certainly living in a simulation. The logic is compelling. If civilizations can develop sufficient computing power to simulate consciousness and reality in detail, and if such simulations interest them, then simulated realities will vastly outnumber base reality. Statistically, we're more likely to be in a simulation than in the original universe. For years, this remained an interesting philosophical thought experiment, but after 2012, it exploded into mainstream consciousness. Billionaire technologists began discussing it seriously. Elon Musk stated publicly that he believes we're likely in a simulation. Scientists began proposing experiments to test whether we live in simulated reality. The shift wasn't gradual. Around 2012, simulation theory transitioned from fringe speculation to legitimate topic of intellectual discussion. Popular culture embraced it. Films and television shows explored the concept. The Matrix, released in 1999, became a cultural touchstone referenced constantly in conversations about reality's nature. Why did this idea gain such traction precisely when it did? Conspiracy theorists suggest it's because reality began feeling simulated. The acceleration of technology, the rise of virtual and augmented reality, the increasing difficulty distinguishing authentic from artificial experience, all contributed to a sense that existence itself might be a construct. But the timing links directly to 2012. If that date marked a reality shift, a transition between ages or timelines, simulation theory provides a framework for understanding what might have occurred. In a simulation, reality can be updated, patched, modified. Code can be rewritten. The system can be rebooted. What if December 21st, 2012, represented a version update? Not the end of reality, but a fundamental modification to how it operates. The apocalypse reimagined not as destruction, but as software upgrade. This interpretation explains several phenomena. The Mandela effect becomes a database merge issue, conflicting versions of history creating memory discrepancies. The feeling of unreality reflects bugs in the new code, glitches in the updated simulation. The acceleration of time suggests processing changes, the simulation running faster to handle increased complexity. It sounds absurd. But it addresses the essential mystery. Why does reality feel different after 2012? Why do so many people report that something fundamental changed, even though they can't identify what? Simulation theory offers an answer that doesn't require ancient prophecy or particle physics. It suggests that reality is construct, and constructs can be modified. The world didn't end. It was updated. We continued into the new version, mostly unaware, except for a lingering sense that something isn't quite the same as before. Chapter 8. Governments and Silence. For all the public hysteria leading up to December 21st, 2012, governmental response was remarkably restrained. Official statements were brief, factual, dismissive. No emergency preparations, no disaster protocols, no special sessions of Congress or Parliament. The United States government issued a simple statement. The Mayan Calendar doesn't predict the end of the world. NASA created a website debunking doomsday scenarios, addressing questions about planetary alignments, solar storms, and various apocalyptic theories. The tone was paternalistic, almost amused. Nothing to worry about. Go about your business. But this response raises serious questions, when examined carefully. Governments take potential threats seriously. They spend billions on scenarios that have minimal probability. They maintain elaborate continuity of government protocols for unlikely disasters. They track asteroids, monitor solar activity, prepare for pandemics, wargame terrorist scenarios. The United States maintains underground bunkers capable of housing key government personnel during catastrophic events. The Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center in Virginia can sustain hundreds of people indefinitely. Similar facilities exist at Raven Rock Mountain Complex in Pennsylvania and Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado. These installations weren't built for likely scenarios. They exist for possibilities that might never occur but would be catastrophic if they did. Federal agencies have detailed response plans for scenarios far less discussed than 2012. Zombie apocalypse response protocols exist, created as training exercises but outlining concrete steps for breakdown of civil order. Nuclear war contingencies dictate who survives, who leads, how government continues. Pandemic plans specify quarantine procedures, resource allocation, martial law implementation. Yet for an event that captured global attention, that drove people to stockpile supplies and make emergency plans, governments did essentially nothing. No special monitoring beyond normal operations, no contingency arrangements different from standard protocols, no elevated alert status, no quiet mobilization of emergency resources. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, responsible for disaster response, issued no special preparations. The Department of Homeland Security maintained normal threat levels. Military forces remained at standard readiness. Nothing in governmental behaviour suggested they took the dates seriously. Conspiracy theorists ask, why prepare the public for nothing unless you know something will happen quietly? Consider the alternative scenario. If governments believed December 21st represented a genuine threat, any kind of catastrophic risk, they would prepare. But such preparations are difficult to hide. Reporters notice when emergency supplies are moved. Employees talk when they're asked to work unusual assignments. Budget allocations reveal priorities through paper trails. If serious preparation occurred, media would discover it, and discovery would create the very panic governments hope to avoid. The preparation itself would cause chaos, potentially more dangerous than the actual threat. Stock markets would crash, supply chains would collapse, social order would fray as people scrambled to protect themselves. So governments face a paradox. If the threat is real, preparing causes problems, but not preparing means being caught unprepared if the threat materializes. The solution, historically, has been plausible deniability. Prepare quietly using resources that don't attract attention. Frame preparations as routine exercises or maintenance. Move pieces into place without announcing intentions. But for 2012, no such quiet preparation appears to have occurred. Freedom of Information Act requests filed in subsequent years revealed no unusual government activity around the date. Budget documents show no special allocations. Personnel records indicate no unusual deployments or training exercises. If governments prepared secretly, they did so with unprecedented operational security. The more likely explanation: governments knew the date represented no physical threat. Their calm response reflected genuine confidence that December 21st would pass without incident. The question becomes, how did they know? Classified scientific analysis provides one possibility. Government research programs likely examined the doomsday scenarios more thoroughly than public agencies. They would have consulted astronomers about galactic alignments, solar physicists about solar activity, archaeologists about Mayan calendar interpretation. These classified assessments presumably concluded no credible threat existed. But what if those assessments revealed something else? What if classified analysis indicated something would happen, but not something physically dangerous? Not an event requiring evacuation or military response, but a consciousness shift, a timeline transition, something that would affect perception rather than infrastructure. How do you prepare for that? You can't. More importantly, you can't explain it. Imagine a government press conference. December 21st will mark a transition to a new timeline. Some of you may experience memory discrepancies. Reality might feel different. This is normal and poses no physical danger. Maintain calm and continue normal activities. The public reaction would be catastrophic. People would assume government insanity or deception. Panic would spread faster than any physical disaster. The announcement itself would create the chaos it aimed to prevent. Better to say nothing, let the date pass, deal with aftermath quietly. This interpretation suggests governments did have classified knowledge about 2012. Not knowledge of physical catastrophe, but but knowledge of perceptual transition. Scientists working in classified programs with access to data and resources beyond public science understood something unusual would occur, but the nature of the occurrence made public disclosure impossible. Evidence for this interpretation exists in governmental silence after the date. If December 21st truly represented nothing, governments would likely reference it later. Politicians love vindication. They would cite it as an example of media-driven hysteria, proof that conspiracy theories lead nowhere. It would become a cautionary tale about believing fringe speculation. Instead, the date is rarely mentioned in official contexts. When journalists or researchers bring it up, officials deflect or change subjects. The date became something people don't discuss seriously in public forums, not because it's embarrassing, but because addressing it opens questions better left unexamined. Presidential daily briefings, the classified intelligence summaries provided to the president, remain secret for decades. Those from December 2012 won't be declassified until at least 2037. Congressional Intelligence Committee meetings about the period remain classified. Military exercises conducted in late 2012 have unusual classification levels compared to similar operations before and after. Something about that period remains sensitive. Not obviously catastrophic, not clearly threatening, but significant enough to warrant ongoing secrecy. The standard explanation would be routine classification of sources and methods. Intelligence agencies protect how they gather information regardless of the information's content. But the pattern suggests something more. Multiple agencies, across multiple countries, maintaining unusual silence about a specific date. Not dramatic silence that draws attention, but quiet absence of discussion. The topic simply doesn't appear in context where it normally would. International coordination raises additional questions. The United Nations issued a brief statement before December 21st, noting the date had no scientific significance. But UN agencies that typically warn about disasters, monitor global threats, and coordinate international response maintained unusual silence. No emergency meetings, no special protocols, no activated response networks. This international calm suggests coordination. Different governments reach similar conclusions independently, or more likely, shared classified information indicating December 21st posed no conventional threat. Intelligence sharing between allied nations is routine. If American agencies concluded the date was safe, they would share that assessment with allies. Everyone would maintain calm public posture. But what if the shared intelligence indicated something unusual would occur? What if multiple governments knew consciousness would shift, reality would feel different, but physical danger would be minimal? International coordination would be essential. Everyone needs the same story. No one breaks ranks. The date passes quietly, and afterward, everyone maintains the same silence. Russian government response was particularly interesting. Russia typically maintains independent positions from Western governments, yet their statements about 2012 matched Western assessments almost exactly. No threat, no concern. Continue normal operations. The coordination suggests shared information transcending geopolitical divisions. China, similarly isolated from Western intelligence networks, issued nearly identical statements. December 21st represented nothing concerning. The public should ignore doomsday predictions. Life would continue normally. The uniformity of message across adversarial governments suggests either genuine consensus or coordinated messaging about something they all understood but couldn't publicly acknowledge. What did governments know? Classified documents won't be released for decades. We can only speculate based on what they did and didn't do. And what they didn't do is fascinating. They didn't prepare for disaster. They didn't celebrate being right. They simply went quiet and let the topic disappear. The conspiracy interpretation suggests this is exactly how you'd handle a confirmed consciousness shift or timeline transition. You can't prevent it. You can't explain it without causing panic. You can't protect people from perceptual changes. So you monitor, document, and maintain plausible deniability. You let it happen and pretend afterward that nothing occurred. You also quietly study the effects. Government research programs following 2012 would have investigated whether anything measurable changed. Psychological studies of time perception, memory accuracy, consciousness states, statistical analysis of behaviour patterns, mental health trends, social dynamics, all classified, all deniable, all focused on understanding what actually happened. Years later, researchers filing Freedom of Information Act requests encounter unusual resistance. Documents are heavily redacted. Some materials remain classified beyond normal schedules. Appeals are denied with vague justifications. The pattern suggests something worth hiding, even if that something isn't traditionally dangerous. The silence itself tells a story. In a world of leaks, whistleblowers and investigative journalism, maintaining perfect secrecy is nearly impossible. Yet no credible insider has confirmed what governments knew about 2012. Either nothing existed to leak or the secret is compartmentalised so effectively that few people know the full picture. Compartmentalisation works by dividing information. Different people know different pieces. No one except top officials sees the complete pattern. Scientists studying consciousness changes don't know about timeline analysis. Intelligence analysts tracking social changes don't know about particle physics research. Everyone has their piece. Nobody has the puzzle. This approach maintains secrecy but also indicates seriousness. Routine matters don't require such extreme compartmentalization. The fact that 2012 remains unusually opaque decades later suggests governments consider it genuinely significant, regardless of public dismissal. Chapter 9. The world that feels different. The most compelling evidence for something genuinely unusual about 2012 isn't found in ancient calendars or particle physics. It's found in human experience, in the consistent, widespread report that reality feels different now than it did before that year. People describe it in various ways. The world feels less real, more artificial, like living in a movie or video game. Events lack weight. Nothing feels entirely serious anymore. History feels accelerated, compressed, like watching footage in fast forward. Others report altered memory. Not specific false memories like the Mandela effect, but a general sense that their past feels unfamiliar. Looking at photos from before, 2012 sometimes creates dissonance, a feeling of observing someone else's life rather than remembering your own. Some describe emotional detachment, an inability to feel things with the intensity they remember from before, like being wrapped in invisible insulation that dulls both joy and pain. Going through motions without being fully present. No single event explains these reports. They're subjective, variable, impossible to verify objectively. Psychology offers explanations: dissociation from trauma, digital overload, the natural numbing that comes with age. These explanations are valid and sufficient for individual cases, but the scale is remarkable. These aren't isolated reports. They appear across cultures, age groups, demographics. Online communities form around this shared experience of reality feeling wrong. People discover others describing identical sensations they thought were unique to them. The conspiracy interpretation suggests these reports aren't coincidental. They reflect a genuine change in how reality operates. Not a physical change detectable by instruments, but an experiential change felt by consciousness. The world after 2012 isn't the same world that existed before. It's similar, continuous in most respects, but fundamentally different in ways that matter to subjective experience. Think of it like this. Imagine reality as a radio signal. Before 2012, the signal was clear, strong, perfectly tuned. After 2012, there's static. The content is mostly the same, but there's interference, distortion. You can still understand what's being broadcast, but it doesn't sound quite right. The signal is degraded in ways that are noticeable, but difficult to precisely describe. This metaphor captures what people report. Reality continues, events happen, life goes on. But the quality of experience has changed. The signal isn't as clear. Things that should matter don't. Things that shouldn't matter dominate attention. Time behaves strangely. Memory feels unreliable. The boundary between real and artificial becomes increasingly uncertain. Whether this represents actual timeline shift, collective psychological response to technological and cultural changes, or something else entirely remains unknown. But the experience is real. Millions of people feel it. They recognize it in each other when they discuss it, and they consistently date the change to around 2012. Chapter 10. What if it already happened? Let's consider the most radical version of the conspiracy theory, the one that's hardest to accept but also hardest to disprove. What if the apocalypse actually happened? What if December 21st, 2012 marked the end of the world, but not in the way anyone expected? In most apocalyptic scenarios, the world ends dramatically. Fire, flood, impact, pandemic. Survivors know they survived. They see the destruction. They experience the before and after as radically different states. But what if the apocalypse was different? What if it was a timeline branch? The old world ended, but consciousness continued into a new timeline, a parallel reality so similar to the previous one that the transition was nearly seamless. In this interpretation, everyone died on December 21st, 2012, but the transition was so smooth, so continuous, that no one noticed. You went to sleep in one reality and woke up in another, your memories automatically updating to maintain consistency. For most people, the shift was invisible, but not for everyone. Some retained partial awareness, not conscious memory of dying and being reborn, but a persistent sense that something fundamental changed, that the world after the date isn't quite the same as the world before it. These people experience the Mandela effect, notice the unreality, feel the acceleration of time. This version of the theory sounds insane. It requires accepting that death occurred without anyone noticing, that consciousness transferred between realities, that what we consider physical continuity is actually timeline jumping. But it addresses everything. It explains why reality feels different, why memories don't match history, why time accelerates, why nothing feels entirely real anymore. We're not in the original world. We're in a continuation, a parallel version that branched from the original timeline at the moment the prophecy predicted it would end. The Maya weren't predicting planetary destruction. They were identifying a timeline divergence point. The Hindu yugas, the Hopi world ages, the Egyptian cycles all describe the same phenomenon. Reality operating in distinct ages, with transition points between them. 2012 marks such a transition. The old age ended. We continued into the new one. Evidence for this theory is impossible to obtain. If the transition was seamless, if memories automatically updated, there would be no way to prove the old world ever existed differently. You can't compare current reality to previous reality if you only have access to current reality and automatically updated memories. But the feeling persists, the sense that something ended and something new began, that we're living in a world that's similar to but distinct from the one we remember. That reality itself changed in ways that matter, even if we can't measure them. Epilogue. The world after the end. History records explosions. It remembers catastrophes, wars, collapses. These are easy to document because they're visible, dramatic, undeniable. Buildings fall, empires crumble, millions die. The before and after are clearly distinguishable, but some endings pass quietly. They occur in perception rather than fact, in feeling rather than event. They transform the texture of existence without changing its basic structure. These endings are harder to recognize, easier to dismiss, impossible to prove. December 21st, 2012 came and went without fire or flood. The world continued. People who had prepared for apocalypse felt foolish. Media outlets mocked the hysteria. Government said nothing. But if you listen carefully, you hear something else. In late-night conversations and online forums and casual comments and half-jokes, people express the same basic feeling. Something changed that year. Not dramatically, not obviously, but fundamentally. The world after 2012 doesn't feel like the world before it. Maybe it's just psychology, digital overload, cultural anxiety, the natural result of living through rapid technological change. Maybe the feeling of unreality reflects external pressures rather than actual reality shift. Or maybe the ancient cultures were right. Maybe time operates in cycles. Maybe certain moments mark transitions between ages. Maybe December 21st, 2012 represented such a moment. Not the end of the physical world, but the end of a reality phase. A quiet apocalypse that left no ruins but changed everything nonetheless. Perhaps 2012 was not the end of the world. Perhaps it was the end of the world we remember. And we've been living in the next version ever since, trying to understand why everything feels slightly wrong, why our memories don't quite match, why time moves differently than it used to. The apocalypse happened, we survived. But survival meant transition into something new, something similar but not identical. Something that preserved continuity while fundamentally altering the nature of existence itself. And if that's true, if we're living in the world after the end, the question becomes, what kind of world is this? What age have we entered? And what comes next when this cycle completes? The date that was supposed to end everything instead marked a beginning. Not of destruction, but of uncertainty. Not of annihilation, but of transformation. Reality didn't collapse, it shifted, and we're still discovering what that means. Listen to how people describe the world now. Notice how often they say it feels wrong, unreal, accelerated, artificial. Pay attention to the widespread sense that something fundamental changed in the early 2010s. It's not just a few conspiracy theorists. It's millions of people across all demographics expressing the same basic experience. Maybe they're all wrong. Maybe it's just modern life, technology, stress, the normal progression of history, creating the sensation. Maybe there's nothing unusual about 2012 at all. Or maybe something actually happened. Something quiet. Something that affected consciousness rather than matter. Something that ancient cultures predicted and modern science accidentally facilitated. Something that changed the world not by destroying it, but by transitioning it into a new phase of existence. The world didn't end in 2012, but the world we knew did, and we've been living in what comes after, trying to understand what exactly happened and what it means for whatever comes next. Because if the ancient cycles are real, if reality truly operates in ages that complete and renew, then 2012 wasn't an ending, it was a beginning, the start of something new. An age we're still learning to navigate, still trying to understand, still adapting to, as we realise that the rules might have changed in ways we haven't fully recognised yet. The apocalypse was quiet. The transition was smooth. But it happened, and recognising that it happened might be the first step toward understanding what this new world actually is, and how to live in it consciously, rather than in persistent confusion about why everything feels different than we remember. Thank you for listening to this investigation. If this resonated with you, if you felt this same sense that reality changed around 2012, you're not alone. Millions share this experience. Whether it represents actual reality shift or collective psychological response remains unknown. But the feeling is real, widespread, and worth paying attention to. Sweet dreams, wherever and whenever you are. Before we begin, if you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review means the world to us, and if you want, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're tuning in from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is listening, and of course, if you enjoy the content, subscribing really helps us keep bringing you these stories. Now let's get into it. They say power whispers, but in the California redwoods, Beneath trees that have stood for centuries, power doesn't need to speak at all. It simply gathers and waits. Part 1. The recording. The camera was hidden in a hollowed-out book. Alex had carried it for 3 miles through the forest, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every snapped twig beneath his boots felt like a gunshot. Every shadow between the towering redwoods seemed to shift and watch. It was mid-July in the year 2000, and Alex Jones had just done something most journalists only fantasized about. He had infiltrated Bohemian Grove. The fence had been easier to climb than expected. No electric wire, no guards with dogs, just chain link and darkness and the smell of California pine heavy in the summer air. He'd studied satellite photos for weeks, memorized the layout, waited until the first night of the encampment when security would be focused inward, not out. The reconnaissance had taken months. Alex had spoken with former employees, kitchen staff who'd signed non-disclosure agreements, maintenance workers who'd seen things they couldn't legally discuss. Each conversation had been careful, coded. One former groundskeeper had drawn a map on a napkin in a diner outside Monterey, then burned it in the ashtray before leaving. Another had simply said, "First Saturday night, after dark, stay in the trees." Now he crouched behind a massive redwood trunk watching. The bark pressed against his back, rough and ancient. Somewhere in the distance an owl, a real one, called out into the night. The sound seemed like a warning. Through the trees he could see firelight, hear voices, low, rhythmic, chanting. The sound rolled through the grove like distant thunder, raising goosebumps along his arms despite the warm night. It wasn't the words that unsettled him. He couldn't make those out yet, but the tone, the unified cadence of dozens of voices speaking as one. He pressed record. The camera captured what most of the world would never see. Dozens of figures in dark robes gathering in a clearing. At the centre stood something that didn't belong in any California forest. A stone owl towering 40 feet high, its blank eyes reflecting the flames below. The owl's face was impassive, carved with an almost Egyptian quality. Ancient, knowing, indifferent to human concerns. The ceremony was called the cremation of care. Alex didn't know that yet. He only knew that some of the most powerful men in America were standing in the darkness, wearing hoods, chanting at a stone idol while something burned in an effigy at its base. The effigy was human-shaped, wrapped in fabric, suspended above the flames by chains. As it burned, the chanting grew louder. His voice echoed across the clearing, amplified, theatrical, speaking in archaic language about casting off the burden of conscience, about freedom from responsibility, about 2 weeks of pure indulgence without guilt. Alex's finger stayed on the record button, even as every instinct screamed at him to run. He filmed for 17 minutes before he heard footsteps behind him. Heavy boots on forest floor, multiple people, moving with purpose. Security had spotted him, or someone had reported movement in the restricted zone. When he finally escaped back over that fence, footage secured, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely drive. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. He didn't stop at the motel where he'd been staying. He drove straight through, 5 hours back to the Bay Area, checking his rearview mirror every 30 seconds. The video would be uploaded within days, and the question it raised was simple, haunting, and impossible to fully answer. Why do the world's most powerful men gather in total secrecy to perform rituals in the woods? Part 2. The beginning. 128 years earlier, in 1872, 5 men sat in a San Francisco tavern and decided to start a club. They were writers, journalists, artists, men who valued culture over commerce, poetry over profit. They called themselves bohemians, wanderers, freethinkers, people who rejected the rigid social structures of Gilded Age America. The founding members were modest in means but ambitious in spirit. Henry Edwards, a journalist for the San Francisco Examiner. James Bowman, a struggling painter whose landscapes never sold. Joseph Redding, a poet whose work appeared in small literary magazines nobody read. They met in cheap taverns. rented rooms above bakeries for meetings, staged plays in borrowed theatres. The Bohemian Club was born from good intentions. Their motto, borrowed from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, was elegant. Weaving spiders come not here. It meant business and politics were forbidden. Only art mattered, only creativity, only the meeting of minds unchained from the pursuit of wealth. For 27 years it stayed that way. The club met in the city. They performed plays, read poetry, debated philosophy. Membership was exclusive but modest. Journalists who couldn't afford lavish lifestyles, painters who worked in cramped studios, musicians who played for passion instead of pay. Annual dues were kept low deliberately, to ensure artists could afford to participate. Then, in 1899, everything changed. The club purchased 2,700 acres of ancient redwood forest north of San Francisco in Sonoma County. The money came from a wealthy patron, an industrialist, named William Crocker, whose father had built the Central Pacific Railroad. Crocker wasn't an artist, he was a banker, but he appreciated culture, or so he said, and he wanted to support the club's vision. They called it Bohemian Grove. The first summer encampment was held that same year. 2 weeks of camping, drinking, performing plays beneath the trees. Members slept in tents, cooked over campfires, staged elaborate theatrical productions on outdoor stages they built themselves. It was supposed to be an escape, a place where creative souls could breathe. But money always follows beauty, and power always follows money. Within 5 years, the membership had shifted. Bankers joined, claiming an appreciation for the arts. Railroad executives attended performances and asked to become members. Oil magnates from Southern California heard about the Grove and requested invitations. The artists noticed, of course. They complained in private letters, in journal entries that would be discovered decades later. One founding member wrote, "We built a sanctuary from wealth, and wealth has followed us here. They dress as we do, speak as we do, but they are not us. They are tourists in our world." But the club needed money. Maintaining 2,700 acres of pristine forest wasn't cheap, and the wealthy patrons were generous. They funded new cabins, improved facilities, hired staff to manage the property. All they asked in return was membership, access. The artists told themselves it would be fine, that the motto still mattered, that business and politics would still be banned. They were wrong. Part 3. When the poets left. By 1905, the membership roles had shifted completely. Where there had once been struggling writers, there were now railroad tycoons. Where there had been painters, there were now bankers. Industrialists joined, oil magnates, men whose decisions shaped markets, cities, entire regions. The original artists didn't leave immediately. They stayed, watching their club transform around them. Some adapted, finding wealthy patrons among the new members. Others grew bitter, attending less frequently, until they stopped coming altogether. A few died, their obituaries noting their founding membership in the Bohemian Club, a detail that meant less with each passing year. The motto remained the same: "Weaving spiders come not here." But everyone knew it had become a lie. The business deals happened anyway, just quietly. A railroad executive and a mining company owner would take a walk through the forest discussing land rights. A banker and a politician would share drinks by the campfire talking about legislation. No formal contracts were signed at the Grove. That would violate the spirit of the motto. But understandings were reached, handshakes were exchanged, partnerships were formed. By the 1920s, the transformation was complete. Herbert Hoover attended regularly, years before becoming president. He was Secretary of Commerce at the time, and the Grove gave him access to the titans of American industry in an informal setting. Decisions that might take months of official meetings in Washington could be sketched out over a weekend in the Redwoods. Dwight Eisenhower was a regular guest in the 40s and 50s. A Supreme Allied commander during World War II, he'd become accustomed to making decisions of global consequence. The Grove offered something different, a place to network with the civilian leadership that controlled defence budgets, manufacturing capacity, political support. Richard Nixon came repeatedly throughout his career. He'd first attended in the late 40s, shortly after being elected to Congress. The Grove was where he made the connections that would carry him to the vice presidency, then the presidency, then ultimately to resignation in disgrace. But even after Watergate, even after his political career had ended, he maintained his membership. Ronald Reagan, George Bush Sr., Henry Kissinger, military leaders, intelligence officials, CEOs of companies that controlled more wealth than most nations. The list reads like a shadow government, and perhaps that's exactly what it was. The Bohemian Grove had evolved. It was no longer a retreat for artists. It was a gathering place for the architects of American power. And what happened there? What was discussed? What was decided? What was agreed upon in hushed conversations between men who shaped policy and war and economy remained locked behind walls of absolute secrecy. Part 4. The Manhattan Project. September 1942. The world was at war. Nazi Germany had swept across Europe, occupying France, bombing London into rubble, pushing deep into Soviet territory. Imperial Japan controlled the Pacific from mainland China to the Philippines. America had been pulled into the conflict less than a year earlier, still reeling from Pearl Harbor, still scrambling to mobilize an economy that had spent the previous decade in depression. That September, during the Bohemian Grove's annual encampment, a meeting occurred that would change human history. Present were some of the most brilliant scientific minds in America. Ernest Lawrence, a physicist who had invented the cyclotron and would win the Nobel Prize. J. Robert Oppenheimer, a theoretical physicist from Berkeley who spoke 6 languages and quoted Hindu scripture. Military officials whose names remain partially classified to this day. Men who understood strategy and logistics and the brutal mathematics of total war. The meeting happened in a camp called Chowder and Marching Society. It wasn't a public gathering, no stage, no audience, no theatrical performance. Just a dozen men in a cabin talking late into the night. They drank scotch. They smoked cigarettes. They discussed the possibility of building a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. The physics was theoretical but promising. German scientists had discovered nuclear fission in 1938. Jewish physicists fleeing the Nazis had brought that knowledge to America, along with a terrifying certainty. If they could figure out how to weaponize atomic energy, so could Hitler. The question wasn't whether to build the bomb. The question was how quickly it could be done, and whether America could do it before Germany. No official minutes were recorded, no transcripts exist. But historians have confirmed the meeting happened. Lawrence's personal papers mention the Grove gathering. Oppenheimer's biographers reference conversations that took place there. Military records show that key personnel were granted leave to attend the encampment that year, despite wartime restrictions on travel. Shortly afterward, within weeks, the Manhattan Project was formally accelerated. Funding increased exponentially. Personnel expanded from dozens to thousands. Facilities were built in secret locations: Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico. The secret program to develop atomic weapons shifted into high gear. Conspiracy theorists point to this and ask a simple question. Did they plan the atomic bomb at Bohemian Grove? The answer is more complicated than yes or no. They didn't design the bomb there. The physics was developed in labs, the engineering in Los Alamos, the uranium enrichment in massive facilities that required industrial infrastructure. But the decision to move forward, the political will, the strategic coordination between military and scientific leadership, the allocation of resources on a scale never before attempted, may have crystallized in those private conversations beneath the redwoods. Think about what that means. The most consequential weapon in human history, the device that would kill hundreds of thousands at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the technology that would define global politics for the next 80 years. Its development may have been accelerated by conversations held at a private men's club, away from congressional oversight, away from public debate, away from any democratic process. No oversight, no press, no records, just power. talking to power, deciding the fate of the world over whiskey and campfire smoke. Part 5. The Owl. The stone owl stands at the edge of a small lake called Mirror Lake, 40 feet tall, carved from concrete and stone, its wings spread wide, its eyes empty and unblinking. The construction is crude by modern standards. The owl looks less like a majestic bird and more like an ancient idol, something that might be discovered in ruins of a forgotten civilization. At its base is a shrine, an altar where the cremation of care ceremony takes place every summer. The ritual happens on the first Saturday night of the encampment. Members are informed of the time through word of mouth. No printed schedules, no announcements. As sunset approaches, men begin gathering at their camps, changing into robes. Each camp has its own colour: red, black, green, brown. The robes are simple, hooded, monastic. By nightfall, hundreds of robed figures form a procession through the trees. They carry torches, real fire, not electric lights. The procession is silent except for the crunch of footsteps on the forest floor and the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. The path winds through the grove for nearly a mile before reaching Mirror Lake. The owl looms above them, lit from below by carefully positioned floodlights that make it appear even larger, more imposing. The lake reflects everything: the owl, the torches, the gathering crowd, creating the illusion of two ceremonies, one above and one below, mirror images in an ancient rite. When the procession is complete, the ceremony begins. It's elaborate, professionally produced. A sound system hidden in the trees broadcasts music, orchestral, dramatic, specifically composed for this ritual. There's narration delivered by a voice that booms across the water with theatrical gravitas. The narration tells a story. Care, the burden of conscience, arrives at the grove seeking to ruin the members' enjoyment. The owl, representing wisdom, representing the ancient knowledge that transcends human morality, rejects care, condemns it, orders it destroyed. Care is represented by a human-shaped effigy, suspended by chains above a pyre at the owl's base. As the narration reaches its climax, the effigy is lowered into the flames. It burns for several minutes while the robed figures watch in silence. The message is clear. For the next 2 weeks, these men are free from the burden of responsibility, free from guilt, free from the weight of their decisions. Care means worry, responsibility, conscience, guilt. The ceremony represents shedding those burdens. Officially, it's described as harmless theatre, a tradition dating back to the early 1920s, created by a member who was a professional theatre director. A way for powerful men to relax and forget the weight of their decisions. Nothing more than elaborate performance art, a bit of pageantry to mark the beginning of the encampment. But symbolism matters. When you tell the world's most influential leaders that they can, symbolically, ritually, burn away their sense of responsibility, what are you really doing? When CEOs who make decisions affecting thousands of employees watch care burn, what message do they receive? When politicians who control military budgets see conscience destroyed by fire, what permission are they being given? When generals who order troops into combat participate in a ritual that explicitly celebrates freedom from moral burden, what does that say about the wars they'll wage? Are you helping them relax? Or are you giving them permission? The owl is Minerva, they say, Roman goddess of wisdom. The ceremony is about wisdom transcending worry, about strategic thinking unencumbered by emotion. But Minerva was also the goddess of warfare, and wisdom without conscience is just calculation. Part 6. Nixon's Tape. August 1971. President Richard Nixon was in the Oval Office speaking with his Chief of Staff, H.R. Haldeman. The conversation was recorded, as all conversations in Nixon's White House were, captured by the secret taping system that would eventually destroy his presidency. They were discussing the Bohemian Grove. The context is important. Nixon and Haldeman were talking about campaign strategy for the upcoming election. They'd been reviewing potential donors, discussing who to court, who to invite to White House dinners. Someone, the tape doesn't make clear who, had suggested reaching out to Bohemian Grove members. Nixon's response was immediate and visceral. The Bohemian Grove, I won't go into it, but it's the most effing goddamn thing you could ever imagine. The profanity was unusual for Nixon on tape. He cursed occasionally, but this was emphatic, emotional, the kind of language people use when describing something that genuinely disturbed them. He refused to elaborate. The recording cuts to a different topic, something about fundraising in California, details that seemed trivial compared to what had just been said. Whatever Nixon meant, whatever he saw or experienced or understood about the Grove, he never explained publicly. The comment was discovered years later during the Watergate investigation, buried in hours of White House recordings that were being analysed for evidence of obstruction of justice. People still debate what he meant. Was he disgusted by something he witnessed? Nixon had attended the Grove multiple times throughout his political career. He'd participated in the cremation of care ceremony. He'd networked with the members, built the relationships that would carry him to the presidency. But his comment suggested something more than simple distaste for theatre. Was he impressed in a way that troubled him? The phrase, most goddamn thing you could imagine, could mean extraordinary, overwhelming beyond normal experience. Perhaps he'd seen the true extent of the power concentrated in those woods, and it had shaken something in him. Was he horrified? Nixon was many things, calculating, paranoid, ruthless when necessary, but he wasn't immune to moral consideration. The Watergate scandal showed his capacity for wrongdoing, but the tapes also showed a man who sometimes agonized over decisions, who understood the weight of presidential power. Perhaps something at the Grove had crossed a line he didn't want to discuss. Was he amused in a dark way? Nixon had a cynical streak. Maybe he found the whole thing absurd. Powerful men playing dress-up, performing elaborate rituals, taking themselves so seriously. But if it was just silly theatre, why refuse to explain it? The ambiguity is the point. If Bohemian Grove was just a social club, just a place where old men dressed up and performed silly rituals, why did the President of the United States refuse to describe it? What was he protecting? Or what was he afraid to reveal? Haldeman, for his part, never elaborated either. Years later, after serving time for his role in Watergate, he was occasionally asked about the Grove in interviews. He always deflected, changed the subject, or said simply, "It's a private club, members don't discuss it." But the tape remains. Nixon's voice, recorded without his knowledge, preserved for history. A sitting president in the privacy of the Oval Office, describing something he'd personally witnessed as the most goddamn thing you could imagine, and then refusing to explain what that meant. Part 7. The Rules. Bohemian Grove operates under rules so strict they resemble military classification protocols. The official rulebook is short, just a few pages, but every word is enforced absolutely. Violations lead to immediate expulsion. No appeals, no exceptions. Members who've belonged for decades have been banned for single infractions. No press allowed, ever. Not mainstream media, not independent journalists, not documentary filmmakers. No exceptions. Reporters who've attempted to enter have been detained by private security, sometimes turned over to local law enforcement on trespassing charges. The club's lawyers are aggressive about prosecution. No recording devices, cameras, phones, audio equipment, all banned. Members are expected to surrender electronics at entry or leave them locked in cars. Some camps conduct electronic sweeps to ensure compliance. The prohibition is taken so seriously that even senior members have been expelled for photographing their own camp areas. No wives or female guests. The Grove is exclusively male. Women are not permitted on the grounds during the encampment, with the exception of a handful of staff members who serve meals and clean cabins. Even female family members of members, daughters, mothers, sisters, are prohibited. The only women allowed are those working in service positions. This rule in particular has generated criticism. Why exclude women entirely? The official explanation is tradition, a preservation of the club's original all-male culture. But critics point out that excluding half the population from a space where policy is discussed and power is consolidated effectively excludes women from certain networks of influence. No public statements. What happens at the Grove stays at the Grove. Members who violate this rule face permanent expulsion. The prohibition extends beyond just talking to press. Members are expected not to discuss Grove matters with anyone, including family members. There are stories of wives who never knew their husbands attended, who discovered the membership only after death when dealing with estate paperwork. There are accounts of children who grew up unaware their fathers disappeared for 2 weeks every July, told only that it was a business retreat or camping trip. Staff sign non-disclosure agreements that extend for decades. Even after leaving employment, they are legally bound not to discuss what they've seen or heard. The NDAs include substantial financial penalties for violations, amounts large enough to bankrupt most working-class people. Some former staff have reported receiving legal threats years after leaving, when the club suspected they might be considering talking to journalists. A former kitchen worker interviewed anonymously in the late 90s said, "I worked there for 3 summers. I saw things, heard things, but I signed papers saying I'd never discuss it, and those papers don't expire. Ever. They made that very clear." Conspiracy theorists argue that this level of secrecy exceeds anything necessary for a social club. If it's just theatre, just rich men playing dress-up in the woods, why the ironclad silence? Why the NDAs? Why the absolute prohibition on documentation? The official answer is privacy. Powerful people deserve a place to relax without scrutiny. Public figures, politicians, CEOs, generals, live under constant observation. Every word is analysed, every action is recorded, every decision is debated. The Grove offers freedom from that burden, a place to be human, to make mistakes, to speak without calculation. That answer would be more convincing if the Grove welcomed documentation that could prove its innocence. If rituals are harmless, why not allow filming? If conversations are purely social, why ban note-taking? If nothing illegal or unethical occurs, why threaten legal action against anyone who discusses what happens there? Privacy and secrecy are not the same thing. Privacy protects individuals from unwanted intrusion. Secrecy protects actions from accountability. The Grove's rules are designed for secrecy. Part 8. The Camps. Bohemian Grove is divided into more than 100 smaller camps, each with its own name, character and membership. Mandalay, Hillbillies, Caveman, Stowaway, Isle of Aves, Silverado Squatters, Lost Angels, Owl's Nest. The names range from whimsical to pretentious, but the hierarchy is real. Some camps are more prestigious than others, some are older, more connected to power. Membership in certain camps is a signal of status within the Grove's internal social structure. Mandalay is considered the most elite. Its members have included multiple presidents, defense secretaries, Supreme Court justices. The camp is located in a prime spot within the Grove, close to the lake, surrounded by old-growth redwoods. The cabins are larger, better appointed. When members give lakeside talks, a daily tradition at the Grove, Mandalay members are given prime-speaking slots. Hillbillies is another high-status camp with a membership that leans toward business leaders, CEOs of major corporations, private equity executives, venture capitalists. The camp throws elaborate parties, brings in expensive whiskey, hires musicians to perform. Caveman, despite its primitive name, is equally prestigious. Military leaders, intelligence officials, defense contractors. The camp has a reputation for serious conversations about national security, geopolitics, strategic planning. Lower status camps exist on the periphery of the Grove, housed in smaller cabins, with memberships that include newly inducted members, younger executives still building their careers, academics and artists who provide intellectual credibility but less practical power. Members spend their 2 weeks rotating between camps, attending lakeside talks, watching theatrical performances, drinking heavily, and most importantly, talking. The daily schedule at the Grove is structured but flexible. Mornings begin with breakfast at individual camps. Then members gather at the lakeside for talks, informal presentations on various topics, given by members or invited guests. Topics range from politics to technology to philosophy. Past speakers have included sitting presidents, Nobel Prize winners, top scientists. Afternoons are for socialising. Members wander between camps, join impromptu discussions, take walks through the forest. This is when the real networking happens. CEOs sit beside generals on fallen logs, discussing defence contracts. Politicians share drinks with intelligence officials, talking about foreign policy. Corporate executives have breakfast with Supreme Court justices, mentioning cases that might affect their businesses. Evenings bring theatrical performances on the Grove's outdoor stages. Productions are elaborate, professionally designed, performed by members who've rehearsed for months. Some are comedies, some are dramas, some are musical reviews. The quality varies, but the attendance is mandatory, a way to ensure all members gather together at least once daily. Late nights are for drinking and deeper conversations. This is when guards are lowered, when the formal structure dissolves, when friendships are cemented and alliances are formed. There are no aides present, no assistants, no one taking notes, no transcripts, no oversight, just conversation. And here's where conspiracy theories find their footing. In 1953, shortly after a Bohemian Grove encampment, the CIA launched Operation Ajax, overthrowing the democratically elected government of Iran and installing the Shah. Multiple attendees of that summer's Grove gathering were directly involved in planning the coup. Allen Dulles, CIA director, Kermit Roosevelt, the CIA officer who ran the operation on the ground, executives from oil companies that would benefit enormously from Iranian oil concessions. Coincidence? The official story is that Operation Ajax was planned in CIA headquarters, approved through proper channels, executed by trained operatives, and that's true. But the will to proceed, the decision that regime change was acceptable, that democracy could be sacrificed for strategic interests, may have been reinforced by conversations at the Grove. In 1967, energy policy discussions at the Grove preceded major shifts in American oil strategy. Executives from companies that profited enormously from those shifts were present. Within months, federal regulations changed, opening new areas for drilling, reducing environmental restrictions, providing tax benefits for oil production. Coincidence? Policy doesn't change in a vacuum. Someone has to advocate for it, someone has to convince legislators, someone has to coordinate between industry and government. The Grove provided a space for those conversations to happen informally, away from congressional hearings, away from public scrutiny. In 1989, defence contractors who attended the Grove saw their contracts renewed and expanded under the next administration. Many of those contractors had been camping alongside future cabinet members, sharing drinks, discussing the importance of military readiness, arguing for increased defence spending. Coincidence? In 2001, weeks after that summer's Grove encampment, the September 11th attacks occurred. The response, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the expansion of surveillance powers, the increase in defence and intelligence budgets, benefited many Grove members. Was the specific attack foreseeable? No. But the broader policy framework that enabled the response, the prioritisation of security over liberty, the willingness to wage preemptive war, had been discussed at the Grove for years. Coincidence? No one can prove coordination. But the proximity, the casual, unrecorded mingling of people who later make decisions that align perfectly, raises questions that are impossible to dismiss entirely. Part 9. The Infiltrators. Alex Jones wasn't the first person to try to expose Bohemian Grove. He was just the first to bring back video. Before him, journalists had attempted to breach the perimeter. Most were caught, detained, and escorted off the property with threats of legal action. A few managed to observe from a distance but saw nothing conclusive. The Grove security was professional, experienced, thorough. In 1989, a team of activists from San Francisco attempted a coordinated infiltration. They planned for months, studying the layout, timing their approach for maximum confusion during the opening ceremony. 3 people made it over the fence. All 3 were caught within 30 minutes, detained in a security building, then handed over to local law enforcement on trespassing charges. They spent the night in jail. The charges were eventually dropped, but the message was clear. The grove was protected. In the mid-90s, a freelance journalist named Rick posed as a service worker. He managed to get hired on kitchen staff, passed the background check, signed the NDA. He worked for 4 days before someone recognised him from a previous article he'd written about elite clubs. He was escorted off property immediately, threatened with a lawsuit for fraud and breach of contract. The lawsuit never materialised. The club likely didn't want the publicity, but Rick's notes and recordings were confiscated. In 2000, Alex Jones succeeded because he was brazen. He didn't sneak in like a spy. He walked in like he belonged. He studied how members moved, how they dressed, what they carried. On the night of the cremation of care ceremony, he simply walked through an entrance gate during a shift change, moving with purpose, looking like he had every right to be there. Security at the Grove follows a simple principle. People who belong act like they belong. They don't hesitate, don't look around nervously, don't question their right to access. Jones understood this. He wore dark clothing that could pass for staff uniform in dim light. He carried the hollowed-out book casually, like it was a notebook or prop for the ceremony. He moved toward the gathering crowd with confidence. Once in the crowd, he was invisible. Hundreds of robed figures, all anonymous, all focused on the ceremony. He positioned himself at the edge, behind a massive redwood trunk, and filmed for 17 minutes. The footage he captured showed exactly what Grove officials had always described: a theatrical ritual performed in robes, involving a stone owl and a symbolic burning. No human sacrifice, no occult summoning, no illegal activity, just theatre. But the image was undeniably strange. Powerful men in robes, chanting in unison, watching an effigy burn while a voice boomed about destroying care and conscience. The footage went viral when Jones released it, spawning countless conspiracy theories, documentaries, YouTube videos, and the fact that it was kept so secret, despite being just theatre, made people wonder what else might be hidden. British journalist John Ronson also infiltrated the Grove around the same time. He was researching a book about extremists and conspiracy theorists, and he wanted to see the Grove for himself. He attended as a guest of a member, not a full infiltration, but still a rare glimpse inside. His account, published in Them, Adventures with Extremists, was more measured than Jones's. He confirmed the rituals are real, the secrecy is absolute, and the membership includes some of the most powerful people in the world. But he also noted the strange disconnect between the ceremony's dramatic presentation and the casual atmosphere afterward. Members treated it like any other theatre performance, applauding at the end, then heading back to their camps for drinks. Ronson wrote, "The cremation of care is the most bizarre piece of theatre I've ever witnessed. But what struck me wasn't the ritual itself. It was how normal the participants found it. They'd been doing this for decades. It was tradition, and tradition, no matter how strange, becomes invisible to those who practice it." What neither infiltration could reveal was the content of private conversations. What was said in the cabins? What was discussed during late-night walks through the forest? What agreements, explicit or implicit, were reached over drinks and campfires? That remains unknown, and perhaps that's the point. The Grove doesn't hide its rituals because the rituals are sinister. It hides its conversations because the conversations are powerful. The cremation of care is theatre, strange theatre, symbolic theatre, theatre that reinforces a particular worldview, but theatre nonetheless. The real secret is what happens after the ceremony ends. Part 10. The Conspiracy. Let's be clear about what Bohemian Grove is not. It is not a site of human sacrifice. No credible evidence supports this. The rituals involve effigies, not people. Claims of ritual murder are based on misinterpretation, deliberate misrepresentation, or outright fabrication. It is not a centre of occult magic. The owl symbolises Minerva, Roman goddess of wisdom. The ceremony is theatrical, not supernatural. There are no spells being cast, no demons being summoned, no supernatural forces being invoked. The participants are powerful, but they're not wizards. It is not illegal. Everything that happens at the Grove, so far as we know, is protected by privacy rights and freedom of association. Wealthy people are allowed to form private clubs. They're allowed to perform strange rituals. They're allowed to network with each other. None of that violates any law. But here's what it might be. A coordination space. A place where people who control industries, governments and militaries can speak freely, without record, without oversight, and without the constraints of public accountability. Think about how policy normally works in a democracy. Proposed legislation is debated publicly. Congressional hearings are held. Interest groups lobby openly. The press covers developments. Citizens can track how their representatives vote, can pressure them, can vote them out if they disagree with their decisions. But what happens when the people making policy, or influencing those who make policy, can meet privately to coordinate positions before any public process begins? What happens when a CEO and a senator can agree on environmental regulations before any bill is introduced, ensuring the final legislation will benefit the CEO's company? What happens when a general and a defence contractor can discuss weapon systems before any Pentagon procurement process begins, ensuring the contractor's bid will be favoured? What happens when industry executives can brief politicians on their preferred policies, provide talking points, coordinate strategies, all before any congressional debate occurs? That's not illegal. But it subverts the democratic process. It creates a shadow channel where decisions are shaped before the public even knows there's a decision to be made. The Grove provides that channel, a bonding mechanism. Shared rituals create loyalty. When you've stood beside someone in a robe, chanting at an owl statue, you've shared something strange and intimate. That creates trust. That creates obligation. Psychological research on group bonding is clear. Shared experiences, especially unusual or emotionally significant experiences, create strong social ties. Military units use shared hardship to build cohesion. Fraternities use initiation rituals to create loyalty. Religious communities use ceremonies to reinforce belonging. The Bohemian Groves rituals serve the same function. When a CEO and a politician participate in the cremation of care together, they're not just watching theatre. They're engaging in a shared ritual that marks them as part of the same tribe. They're members of the same exclusive club. They've participated in the same strange ceremony. That creates a bond that transcends professional relationships. And bonds create obligations. If you're a senator and you need to make a decision that will affect a company, and the CEO of that company is a fellow Grove member who stood beside you at the cremation of care, that relationship affects your thinking. Not overtly, not through explicit corruption, but through the subtle influence of social connection, a pressure release valve. The cremation of care isn't just symbolic fun, it's a psychological tool. It tells participants they can temporarily shed moral weight. And if you're making decisions that affect millions of lives, that kind of psychological permission might be useful. Consider what these men do in their normal lives. CEOs make decisions that result in layoffs, that prioritise shareholders over workers, that externalise environmental costs onto communities. Politicians make decisions that send soldiers to war, that cut social programs to reduce deficits, that protect certain industries while others struggle. Generals make decisions that result in deaths, enemy deaths, civilian deaths, sometimes the deaths of their own troops. Those decisions have moral weight. Human psychology requires us to either justify those decisions or carry guilt about them. The cremation of care offers a third option: ritualise permission to stop caring, even temporarily, even symbolically. It's not that Grove members are cartoonishly evil, cackling as they burn effigies and plot world domination. It's that they've created a space where moral consideration can be set aside, where strategic thinking can proceed without the burden of conscience, where decisions can be made purely on the basis of power and benefit. None of this is provable, but correlation is compelling. When the same people who attend Bohemian Grove later shape policy, wage wars, shift economies, and redefine global power structures. And when those decisions consistently benefit the same small circle of attendees, questions are inevitable. The conspiracy isn't that they're worshipping Satan or performing dark magic. The conspiracy is that they've created a space where power can coordinate without accountability, where relationships can be built that transcend democratic oversight, where decisions can be shaped before the public even knows there's a decision to be made. That's subtle, that's sophisticated, that's far more disturbing than any ritual. Part 11. The Present. Bohemian Grove still meets every summer. 2 weeks in July. Same location, same rituals, same secrecy. The encampment now occurs in the age of social media, satellite imagery, and ubiquitous surveillance technology. Yet somehow it remains largely hidden. The Grove has adapted its security to modern threats. Cell phone jammers are rumoured to be in use during sensitive gatherings. Drone detection systems protect against aerial photography. Digital surveillance of employees and members has intensified. Membership remains exclusive. Waiting lists stretch for years. Entry requires wealth, influence, or both. The initiation fee alone is tens of thousands of dollars, with annual dues to match. For most Americans, that cost is prohibitive. For the members, it's trivial. The demographics have shifted slightly over recent decades. While still overwhelmingly white and exclusively male, the Grove has admitted more tech CEOs, more international business leaders, more financiers from the globalized economy. The old guard, industrialists and politicians, share the camps with newer power brokers, venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, tech entrepreneurs. But the core purpose remains unchanged. Modern technology has made secrecy harder. Satellite imagery shows the layout. Anyone with Google Earth can see the camps, the stages, even the owl statue. Leaked membership lists circulate online, though the Grove denies their accuracy. Former staff occasionally break their NDAs and share fragments of stories, usually anonymously, usually with little concrete detail. But the core remains locked. No one outside the Grove knows what is said there. No one knows what deals are discussed. No one knows what coordination happens between the people who control the levers of power. In 2008, during the encampment, the financial crisis was already building. Members that summer included executives from banks that would soon fail, regulators who would be tasked with managing the collapse, politicians who would vote on bailout packages. What was discussed? What preparations were made? What understandings were reached about how the crisis would be managed? We don't know. In 2016, during the encampment, the presidential campaign was reaching its climax. Members included political operatives, major donors, media executives who would cover the race. What was discussed? What strategies were coordinated? What narratives were agreed upon? We don't know. In 2020, the encampment was cancelled due to the pandemic. For the first time in over a century, the Grove didn't meet. But in 2021, it resumed. Members included pharmaceutical executives, public health officials, politicians dealing with pandemic response. What was discussed about vaccine policy, about mandates, about the balance between public health and economic concerns? We don't know. And that's the real conspiracy. Not devil worship, not occult magic, not human sacrifice. Just power, gathering in private, away from scrutiny, talking without record. Epilogue. The question. Here's what we know for certain. Bohemian Grove exists. This isn't speculation or conspiracy theory. It's a registered private club with a physical address, property deeds, tax records. The world's most powerful men meet there every summer. Membership lists, partial, sometimes outdated but largely accurate, have been leaked over the years. They confirm the presence of presidents, cabinet members, Supreme Court justices, generals, intelligence directors, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. They perform rituals involving a stone owl and symbolic burning. Alex Jones's footage confirmed this. John Ronson's account confirmed this. Even the Grove's official materials acknowledge the cremation of care ceremony. They enforce absolute secrecy. The rules are documented, the NDAs are real. The security is professional and serious. They have done this for over a century. Bohemian Grove's annual encampments began in 1899 and have continued with only rare interruptions ever since. Major historical events, the Manhattan Project, political coups, economic shifts, wars, have followed closely after Grove gatherings, involving people who attended those gatherings. The correlations are documented in historical records, biographies, declassified documents. Here's what we don't know, what they talk about. No recordings exist, no transcripts, no leaked documents describing specific conversations. What they decide. Do explicit agreements get made? Or is it all just informal networking? We don't know what they coordinate. Are strategies developed at the Grove later implemented in policy? Or are the connections purely social? We don't know whether any of it is illegal. Nothing we know about the Grove involves criminal activity. But legality and ethics aren't the same thing. Whether any of it should concern us. Is this just how power works in any society? Or is it a subversion of democratic principles? Reasonable people disagree. So the question isn't really what happens at Bohemian Grove. The question is, why does the world's leadership need a place where no records exist? Think about that for a moment. These are people who run countries, corporations, militaries. Their decisions affect billions of people. Their policies shape economies, determine which nations prosper and which struggle, influence whether wars are fought or peace is maintained. Shouldn't those decisions be made transparently? Shouldn't the conversations that lead to those decisions be documented? Shouldn't the public have some window into how power is exercised on their behalf? The Grove's defenders argue that powerful people deserve privacy, that they need a space to speak freely without every word being analysed, that informal relationships and frank conversations are necessary for effective leadership. And there's truth in that, but there's also danger in it, because power without accountability tends toward abuse. Not always, not necessarily, but the tendency is there. Human psychology is clear on this. People in positions of power, insulated from consequences, gradually come to see their own interests and the public interest as identical. The Grove provides that insulation. It creates a space where the powerful can meet without oversight, can form relationships without transparency, can coordinate without accountability. Is it harmless networking? Is it strategic coordination? Or is it a reminder that real power operates best in the shadows, where questions can't be asked, where deals can't be documented, and where the people making decisions that shape our world never have to explain themselves? You decide, because the Grove isn't going anywhere, and neither are the secrets it keeps. Every July they gather, beneath the redwoods, around the owl, away from the world, and we're left outside watching shadows, asking questions, piecing together fragments of truth. Maybe that's exactly how they want it. In November of the year 2000, a user with the handle TimeTravel0 appeared on a small online forum dedicated to time travel theory. The posts were technical, confident, and oddly specific. Within weeks, the user changed their name to John Teeter and began making claims that would haunt researchers for decades. This is not a story about whether time travel is real. This is a story about information that appeared before it should have been possible to know it. About technical knowledge posted online that would not be publicly confirmed until years later. About a pattern of details so consistent that dismissing them requires almost as much effort as believing them. What follows is an investigation into one of the internet's most persistent mysteries, not because the evidence is conclusive, but because it refuses to be easily explained away. The internet in the year 2000 was fundamentally different from what exists today. Broadband was rare. Most users connected through dial-up modems that screamed and hissed before establishing connection. Social media did not exist in any recognizable form. Forums were isolated communities, small islands of discussion where the same few dozen people might interact for years without ever knowing each other's real names. It was in this environment that something unusual happened, something that would generate more questions than answers for the next 2 decades. Chapter 1. The Man Who Appeared Online. The Time Travel Institute was one of several forums where enthusiasts discussed the theoretical physics of temporal displacement. Most participants were amateur theorists, science fiction fans, or curious individuals exploring ideas at the margins of accepted science. Discussions ranged from serious academic papers to wild speculation about grandfather paradoxes and bootstrap loops. On November 2nd, 2000, a new user appeared. The handle was Time Traveled Zero. The first post was simple, almost tentative. The user asked about the basics of time travel theory, seemingly gauging the community's level of sophistication. Within days, the tone shifted. Time Traveler Zero began answering questions rather than asking them. The posts were different from typical forum content. They lacked the breathless excitement of science fiction fans or the defensive posturing of people trying to prove fringe theories. The writing was calm, procedural, almost bureaucratic. The user wrote like someone filing a technical report. By November 21st, the user had changed their handle to John Teeter. They explained that they were a soldier from the year 2038, sent back in time on a specific military assignment. The mission was not dramatic. It did not involve preventing wars or assassinating historical figures. It was a retrieval operation. Teeter claimed he had been sent to the year 1975 to obtain an IBM 5100 computer. This machine, he explained, contained specific capabilities that were needed in his time. After collecting the computer, he had stopped in the year 2000 to visit family and to see the world before a series of catastrophic events that he claimed would reshape American society. The story was elaborate, but the internet had seen elaborate stories before. What made Teeter unusual was his willingness to engage. He did not simply drop his claims and disappear, he stayed. He answered hundreds of questions over the course of 5 months. He provided technical diagrams. He discussed physics, sociology, and history. He described daily life in his time with mundane detail that seemed inconsistent with fiction. When users asked about future technology, he did not describe flying cars or utopian cities. He described a world that had regressed in some ways. Centralized infrastructure had failed. Communities were smaller, more localized. Technology existed but was simpler, more rugged, designed for reliability rather than advancement. He mentioned that music was still created, but distribution had changed. He said people grew their own food more often. He described a culture that had been through conflict and had emerged more cautious, more self-reliant, less trusting of large institutions. These details felt real in a way that science fiction often does not. They were boring. They were human scale. They suggested experience rather than imagination. Teeter posted photographs. One showed the temporal displacement unit installed in the back of a vehicle. The image was grainy, taken with the low-resolution digital cameras available at the time. The device looked industrial, almost crude. Banks of equipment, cooling systems, control panels. It did not resemble Hollywood's sleek time machines. It looked like something built by engineers working under military constraints. He also posted hand-drawn diagrams explaining how the machine worked. The drawings were technical, but not polished. They looked like field notes, sketches made by someone who understood the mechanics, but was not a professional illustrator. The diagrams included labels, measurements, and notations about gravitational fields and particle acceleration. Throughout his time on the forums, Teeter maintained a consistent persona. He was polite but not warm. He answered questions directly but did not volunteer unnecessary information. He acknowledged skepticism without becoming defensive. When people called him a liar or a fraud, he responded that he understood their position and that he did not require belief. This restraint was unusual. Most hoaxes escalate. They become more dramatic, more desperate for validation. Titer did the opposite. He became more measured as time went on, as if the novelty of the conversation had worn off and he was simply fulfilling an obligation. On March 24, 2001, John Titer posted his final message. It was brief. He thanked the community for their questions and stated that he would be leaving. He did not specify where or when he was going. He did not promise to return. He simply stopped posting, and that was the end. No dramatic farewell, no final proof offered. Just silence. Chapter 2. The specifics that raised eyebrows. What separated John Titer from countless other internet mysteries was the depth and consistency of his technical knowledge. He did not just claim to have travelled through time, he explained in considerable detail how it was done. The device he described was called a C204 temporal displacement unit. It was manufactured, he said, by General Electric in the year 2034. The unit weighed approximately 500 pounds and required a vehicle for transport. Titer initially used a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette convertible, but later switched to a four-wheel drive truck, for practical reasons related to the gravitational effects of the device. The machine operated, according to Titer, by creating two microsingularities. These were not naturally occurring black holes but artificially generated ones, created through particle acceleration and magnetic containment. The singularities were held in a stable configuration by an electron injection manifold and a gravity sensor array. When activated, the singularities would generate an intense gravitational field around the vehicle. This field would warp spacetime in accordance with Einstein's theory of general relativity. By manipulating the rotation and position of the singularities, the operator could control the direction and magnitude of temporal displacement. Titer referenced Kerr black holes specifically. These are rotating black holes, first described mathematically by Roy Kerr in 1963 as a solution to Einstein's field equations. Unlike Schwarzschild black holes, which are non-rotating and have a single event horizon, Kerr black holes have two event horizons, and an ergosphere where space-time itself is dragged around the singularity. The ergosphere is critical. In theory, it is possible to extract energy from a Kerr black hole through a process called the Penrose process, proposed by Roger Penrose in 1969. Titer suggested that his machine exploited similar principles, using the frame-dragging effect of rotating singularities to achieve temporal displacement. This was not pseudoscience. Frame-dragging is a real phenomenon. It was predicted by Einstein and later confirmed by experiments such as Gravity Probe B, launched by NASA in 2004. The idea that rotating masses can drag space-time around them is accepted physics. Titer also discussed the concept of closed time-like curves, or CTCs. These are paths through space-time that loop back on themselves, theoretically allowing an object to return to an earlier point in time. CTCs are solutions to the equations of general relativity under specific conditions, such as near-rotating black holes, or in the presence of exotic matter with negative energy density. The mathematics Titer referenced were legitimate. The terminology was correct. The concepts were grounded in real theoretical physics, not invented jargon. This level of accuracy is difficult to achieve without a strong background in relativity and cosmology. But Titer went further. He explained that time travel did not occur within a single timeline. Instead, each journey resulted in movement to a parallel world line. He described this using what he called the divergence percentage. Travel back 1 year, and you might diverge by 0.1%. Travel back 30 years, and the divergence could be 1 or 2%. This model aligned with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, first proposed by Hugh Everett III in his doctoral dissertation at Princeton in 1957. Everett suggested that every quantum measurement causes the universe to split into multiple branches, each representing a different outcome. No wave function collapse occurs. All possibilities are realised in separate, non-communicating universes. Taita was applying this framework to time travel. In his model, travelling back in time was equivalent to moving from one branch of reality to another. You could not change your own past because you were never in your own past. You were in a nearly identical but separate world line. This solved the grandfather paradox elegantly. If you travelled back and prevented your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, you would not cease to exist. You would simply be in a world line where you were never born. Your original world line would remain unchanged, still containing a version of you who travelled back. The implications were profound. It meant that time travellers could not prevent disasters in their own timeline. They could only create new timelines where those disasters did not occur. Every action in the past would create a branching point, a new universe diverging from the original. Taita claimed that his machine had a gravitational lock that prevented displacement of more than approximately 60 years. He said this was a safety feature, designed to avoid excessive divergence. The further you travelled, the more different the destination world line would be from your origin. He also explained that the process was not instantaneous. The journey involved what he called a gravity field that ramped up over time. The operator would experience a pulling sensation, followed by a brief period of disorientation as space-time reconfigured. Upon arrival, the field would dissipate, and the vehicle would be in the new time and place. The energy requirements, according to Taita, were substantial but manageable. The device drew power from a small but high-output source, possibly a compact fusion reactor or a contained antimatter reaction. He did not specify, suggesting that some details were classified even in his time. Throughout his explanations, Taita maintained a consistent voice. He was not evangelical. He did not insist that people believe him. He presented information as if filing a report for an audience of engineers. When asked questions beyond his expertise, he admitted he did not know. When challenged on physics, he engaged thoughtfully rather than deflecting. This consistency is difficult to maintain over hundreds of posts spanning 5 months. It requires either genuine knowledge or exceptional discipline. Chapter 3. Predictions made in advance. John Titor made numerous statements about the future. Some were vague, some were specific, and some aligned with events that occurred years after his posts, raising uncomfortable questions about how he could have known. He described a future marked by civil conflict in the United States. He said that by 2015, tensions between rural and urban populations would escalate into something resembling a civil war. He described it not as a traditional war with clear battle lines, but as a slow-burning conflict characterized by federal overreach, local resistance, and increasing breakdowns in trust. In the year 2000, this was not a mainstream narrative. The nation had just elected George W. Bush in a contested election, but the political climate was not yet defined by the extreme polarization that would characterize later years. Social media had not yet amplified divisions. The idea of civil conflict seemed remote to most people. Taita also mentioned that the conflict would be tied to issues of civil liberties and federal power. He suggested that a crisis, possibly related to terrorism or security concerns, would lead to increased government control. Citizens in rural areas, he claimed, would resist this control, leading to fractures that would deepen over time. By 2001, the September 11th attacks occurred. The Patriot Act was passed. Surveillance expanded. Debates about civil liberties intensified. Whether Taita predicted this or simply observed trends already in motion is unclear, but the alignment is notable. He predicted that CERN would discover miniature black holes around 2001. This did not happen exactly as stated. However, the Large Hadron Collider, which began operations in 2008, was designed in part to test theories related to micro-black holes and higher dimensional physics. Some theoretical models suggested that such black holes could be created, though none have been detected. Taita's claim about CERN is often cited as a failed prediction, but it is worth noting that his timeline divergence model allows for such failures. If his world line was 1 or 2% different from ours, events might occur at slightly different times, or not at all. He also mentioned mad cow disease. At the time, it was already a known issue, particularly in the United Kingdom, but Tita suggested it would become a more significant problem in the United States. By 2003, the first case of mad cow disease was confirmed in a cow in Washington state. The discovery led to widespread panic, beef recalls, and a temporary ban on American beef exports. Again, this was not a dramatic prediction. Mad cow disease was already in the news. But Tita's emphasis on it, in 2000, before it became a major American issue, shows a pattern of being slightly ahead of the curve. He described advances in computer technology that matched later developments. He mentioned multi-core processors, distributed computing, and the importance of legacy system compatibility. He said that in his time, older programming languages and systems were still in use because they were reliable and well understood. This aligns with the reality of enterprise computing, where COBOL and other legacy languages remain critical decades after being developed. Tita also discussed the internet. He said it would become less centralized, more fragmented. He mentioned that in his time, communities used localized networks rather than relying on massive global platforms. This has not fully occurred, but trends toward decentralized systems, mesh networks, and blockchain technologies reflect movement in that direction. Perhaps most unsettling were his social predictions. He described increasing distrust in institutions. He mentioned that people would become more self-sufficient, growing their own food and relying on local communities. He said media would fracture, with people choosing sources that aligned with their existing beliefs. These trends have accelerated dramatically since 2000. The rise of social media, the decline of traditional journalism, the growth of political polarization, and the emphasis on self-reliance and preparedness all align with Tita's descriptions. None of this is proof. Trends can be observed and extrapolated. A skilled futurist could make educated guesses. But the consistency of Tita's vision, particularly for someone writing in the year 2000, is striking. Chapter 4. The IBM connection, the single most compelling piece of evidence in the John Tita case, involves a computer manufactured in the 1970s. Tita claimed that his mission was to retrieve an IBM 5100 portable computer. This was not a random choice. He stated specifically that the IBM 5100 had a unique feature that was not publicly documented. The machine could emulate and translate older programming languages used in mainframe systems from the 1960s and 70s. This capability, he said, was critical in his time. Legacy systems in 2038 still relied on code written decades earlier, and the IBM 5100 was one of the few machines capable of debugging and translating that code. Without it, critical infrastructure would fail. In the year 2000, the IBM 5100 was an obscure piece of technology. Released in 1975, it was one of the first portable computers, though at £50, portability was relative. It was expensive, marketed primarily to businesses and engineers. By 2000, it was largely forgotten, a curiosity for vintage computing enthusiasts, but not widely discussed. Tita's claim about the undocumented feature seemed oddly specific. Why choose this particular computer? Why claim it had a secret capability? Years later, engineers who had worked on the IBM 5100 began to speak publicly. One of them was Bob Dubke, who confirmed in interviews that the machine did indeed have an undocumented emulation feature. It could read and translate code from older IBM mainframe systems, including those written in APL and BASIC. This capability was intentionally kept quiet. IBM did not advertise it because they did not want competitors to know. It was a feature built in for corporate clients who needed backward compatibility, but was not included in user manuals or marketing materials. The question becomes unavoidable. How did John Tita know this in the year 2000? If he was a hoaxer, he would have needed access to information that was not publicly available. He would have needed to speak with IBM engineers or find internal documentation. This is not impossible, but it requires assumptions about effort and access that seem inconsistent with an elaborate internet prank. One theory is that Titor was himself connected to IBM, either as an employee or as someone who had worked with vintage computing systems. Perhaps he stumbled upon this information through professional channels and decided to build a story around it. But if that were the case, why choose such an obscure detail? Why not pick something more dramatic, something that could be verified immediately and publicly? The IBM 5100 feature was not confirmed until years after Titor disappeared, when former engineers happened to mention it in interviews. It was not the kind of detail that would generate immediate attention. Another possibility is that Titor made a lucky guess. Perhaps he knew the IBM 5100 was used in legacy systems and speculated that it might have undocumented features. This is theoretically possible, but it requires an implausible level of coincidence. The most straightforward explanation is that Titor knew about the feature because he had access to information from IBM insiders. But even this raises questions. If he had such access, what was his motive? There was no book deal, no movie rights, no monetization of the story. He posted on obscure forums, engaged for 5 months, and disappeared. The IBM 5100 claim remains the strongest single piece of evidence in favour of Titor's authenticity. It is a verifiable fact that was stated before public confirmation. It is a detail that should not have been casually known. And yet, it was. Chapter 5. Vanishing Without Resolution. On March 24th, 2001, John Titor posted what would become his final message on the Time Travel Institute forum. The post was brief, professional and unremarkable. He thanked the community for their time and questions. He stated that he would be leaving. He did not specify where he was going or whether he intended to return. And then he was gone. No dramatic exit, no final revelation, no attempt to provide proof that would settle the debate once and for all. He simply stopped posting. The account went silent. The conversation continued without him. In the years that followed, researchers attempted to trace his identity. Investigators analysed his IP addresses, though the logs from that era are incomplete. Some claim the post originated from Florida. Others suggested connections to Texas or California. No definitive location was ever confirmed. Linguistic analysis was conducted on his writing. Researchers looked for patterns, idiosyncrasies, anything that might match other known internet personas. Some believed they found similarities to entertainment lawyers or aspiring science fiction writers. Others argued the analysis was inconclusive. No one came forward to claim credit. This is unusual. Internet hoaxes typically unravel. Someone talks, someone wants recognition, someone cannot resist explaining how they fooled everyone. But with Titor, the silence persisted. In 2003, a woman claiming to be Titor's mother appeared briefly online. She posted under the name K. Titor and stated that her son had returned to his own time. She provided no proof. She engaged minimally with questions. After a short time, she also disappeared. The posts added little to the mystery. If genuine, they only confirmed what Titor had already said. If part of the hoax, they demonstrated remarkable restraint. Most hoaxers would have used such an opportunity to expand the story, to add new details or dramatic twists. Kay Titor did not. She simply stated that her son had left and that she missed him. Attempts to monetize the story came later, but not from Titor himself. In 2003, a book titled John Titor, A Time Traveller's Tale was published. It compiled his forum, posts along with commentary and analysis. The book was released by the John Titor Foundation, an entity with unclear origins. Some speculated that the foundation was created by the original hoaxer, now seeking to profit from the attention. Others believed it was an independent project by people fascinated by the story. The foundation has never revealed who controls it, or whether they have any connection to the original posts. Entertainment lawyer Larry Haber became associated with the foundation. He has represented the interests of the John Titor story in media negotiations, and has been involved in discussions about potential film or television adaptations. Haber has never confirmed or denied whether he knows Titor's true identity. The involvement of a lawyer added fuel to skepticism. It suggested commercial motive, but it also raised questions. If the goal was profit, why wait years to monetize? Why not capitalize on the attention while it was at its peak? The delayed commercialization seemed inconsistent with a planned marketing campaign. Over the years, various individuals have been proposed as the real John Titor, Some have been investigated extensively. None have been definitively proven. The most compelling candidates have all denied involvement, and no evidence has emerged that conclusively links any individual to the posts. The mystery has persisted precisely because it has no clean resolution. There is no confession, no smoking gun, no moment where the curtain is pulled back and the truth is revealed. The case simply remains open, suspended in a state of permanent ambiguity. This lack of closure is itself unusual. It suggests either extraordinary discipline on the part of a hoaxer or the possibility that there is nothing to confess. Chapter 6: Parallel Timelines and Damage Control. One of the most sophisticated aspects of John Titor's narrative was his explanation of how time travel functioned. He did not describe a single fixed timeline where changes could create paradoxes. He described something far more complex and, intriguingly, more consistent with certain interpretations of modern physics. According to Titor, time travel did not occur along a single linear path. Instead, the universe consisted of infinite parallel world lines, each representing a slightly different version of reality. Every quantum event, every decision, every moment of chance created branching points where timelines diverged. When a time traveller moved backward or forward in time, they did not stay within their original world line. They shifted to a parallel one. The degree of divergence depended on the distance travelled. A short jump of a few years might result in a world line almost identical to the origin. A jump of decades would result in greater differences. Titor used a percentage system to describe divergence. He claimed his world line had approximately a 2% divergence from the year 2000 timeline he was visiting. This meant that major historical events were the same. World War II occurred. The Cold War happened. Technology developed along similar paths. But minor details differed. This framework had profound implications. It meant that paradoxes were impossible. If you travelled back in time and killed your grandfather, you would not cease to exist. You would simply be in a world line where you were never born. Your original world line would continue unchanged, still containing the version of you who travelled back. The model also explained why Titor's predictions could fail without disproving his story. If his world line diverged from ours, events that occurred in his timeline might not occur in ours. The civil war he described might happen in his world line but not in ours. CERN might discover micro-black holes in his world line but not in ours. This creates an unfalsifiable narrative. Any failed prediction can be attributed to timeline divergence rather than fraud. Critics argue this makes the story immune to disproof. Supporters argue it makes the story consistent with real theoretical physics. The many-worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, on which Titor's model was based, is a legitimate scientific framework. It was developed by Hugh Everett III in his doctoral thesis at Princeton in 1957. Everett proposed that the wave function never collapses. Instead, all possible outcomes of a quantum measurement occur, each in a separate branch of reality. This interpretation has been debated extensively. Some physicists embrace it because it avoids the measurement problem in quantum mechanics. Others reject it because it seems to violate Occam's razor by proposing an infinite number of unobservable universes. But the interpretation remains a valid solution to the equations of quantum mechanics. It is taught in university physics courses. It is discussed in peer-reviewed journals. It is not fringe science. Titor applied this framework to macroscopic time, travel. He suggested that the same branching that occurs at the quantum level occurs when traversing time. Each journey creates or accesses a new branch. This would have practical implications for time travellers. They could not use time travel to fix problems in their own timeline. They could gather information, retrieve objects, or observe historical events, but any intervention would only affect the new timeline they entered. Titor claimed that this was well understood in his era. Time travel was used for specific missions, primarily retrieval operations or reconnaissance. It was not used to prevent disasters because such prevention would only benefit alternate timelines, not the origin timeline. This pragmatic approach to time travel felt authentic. It lacked the grandiosity of most science fiction. It was not about saving the world or becoming a hero. It was about logistics, about obtaining specific resources or information under controlled conditions. The framework also provided a built-in explanation for why Titor could discuss future events without fear of changing them. Anything he said would only influence the timeline he was visiting, not his own. His timeline would continue on its path regardless of what he revealed. This created a strange ethical situation. Titor could warn people about future disasters, but those warnings would not save anyone in his timeline. They might save people in the new timeline, but his own loved ones, his own history, would remain unchanged. He acknowledged this in his posts. When asked why he did not try to prevent tragedies, he explained that it would be futile. He could prevent them here, but not there. And his mission parameters did not include intervention. This fatalistic acceptance felt real. It suggested someone who had thought deeply about the implications of time travel and had come to terms with its limitations. Chapter 7. Other cases that do not fit. John Titor is not the only person in history to claim foreknowledge of events or to exhibit information that seems temporally displaced. The historical record contains numerous accounts of individuals who described future technologies, predicted events, or possessed knowledge they should not have had. In 1932, a science fiction story called A Logic Named Joe was written by Murray Leinster. The story described a device that could access all human knowledge instantly, answer questions, and connect people across distances. It predicted the internet with remarkable accuracy, decades before computers were widely available. Was Leinster a time traveller? Almost certainly not. He was a skilled science fiction writer who extrapolated from existing trends. But the accuracy of his prediction demonstrates that foresight is possible without time travel. The question is always where the line exists between extrapolation and impossible knowledge. In 1950, a man named Rudolph Fentz allegedly appeared in New York City's Times Square and was struck by a car. According to the story, he was wearing 19th century clothing, carried old currency, and had no modern identification. Police investigated and supposedly found records of a man by that name who had disappeared in 1876. This story is compelling, but it was later revealed to be fiction. It originated in a short story published in Collier's magazine. The author Jack Finney wrote it as speculative fiction, not as a factual account. Over time, the story was repeated as if it were real, demonstrating how legends can emerge from creative work. The Fentz case is a cautionary tale. It shows how easily fiction can be mistaken for fact, especially when details are specific and the story has emotional resonance. It also shows why the Titor case is different. Titor's posts were not presented as fiction. They were presented as first-hand accounts, and they contained verifiable details that were later confirmed. In the 1980s and 90s, several individuals claimed to have knowledge of future events. Some described technological developments. Others predicted political changes or natural disasters. Most were wrong. A few were disturbingly accurate. In 1984, a book called The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey predicted a series of global crises based on biblical prophecy. Many of the predictions failed, but some, particularly those related to Middle Eastern conflict and nuclear proliferation, aligned with later events. Was this foreknowledge or pattern recognition? The debate continues. In the early 2000s, anonymous posts began appearing on internet image boards, claiming knowledge of future events. Some predicted natural disasters. Others described economic collapses or political upheavals. Most were quickly forgotten. A few remain unsettling. In 2008, a post on a forum claimed that a major earthquake would strike Japan. In 2011, the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami devastated the region. The post did not specify a date. It did not provide precise details, but it mentioned Japan, earthquakes, and nuclear consequences. The Fukushima nuclear disaster followed the earthquake. Skeptics note that Japan is an earthquake-prone region. Predicting an earthquake there is not remarkable, but the timing and the mention of nuclear consequences add a layer of specificity that is harder to dismiss as coincidence. In 2013, an anonymous user on an image board described a pandemic emerging from China. that would spread globally and lead to widespread lockdowns. In 2019, such a pandemic began. The post did not name a virus. It did not give a timeline. But the general framework matched. Again, pandemics are not unprecedented. Predicting one is not impossible. But the specific mention of China, the description of global response, and the timing raise questions. These cases do not prove time travel. They are anomalies in a sea of failed predictions. But they share a pattern with the Taita case. They involve information appearing before it logically should. They lack drama. They are not accompanied by grand claims. They simply state something, and later something similar occurs. If time travel were real and operated according to Taita's model, this is what the evidence would look like. Not definitive proof, not public demonstrations, just information, slightly misplaced, occasionally accurate, always deniable. Chapter 8. Government silence and plausible deniability. If time travel were possible, the question of why governments have not confirmed it becomes central. The answer may lie in the nature of the technology itself and the implications it would have for global stability. Time travel, if real, would represent the most significant strategic advantage in human history. It would dwarf nuclear weapons, surveillance systems, or any conventional military technology. A nation with time travel could observe enemy planning before it occurs, retrieve lost intelligence from historical archives, verify the accuracy of historical records, monitor the activities of rival nations in real time without detection, recover lost technologies or knowledge, understand the long-term consequences of policy decisions before implementing them. But these capabilities come with extraordinary risks. The potential for paradoxes, even in a many-worlds framework, could destabilize the fabric of reality. The economic implications would be catastrophic. If time travel were known to exist, markets would collapse. How could contracts be enforced if the past is not fixed? How could property rights be maintained? How could justice systems function? For these reasons, any government possessing time travel would maintain absolute secrecy. Disclosure would not be an option. Even limited acknowledgement would invite scrutiny, espionage, and destabilization. The technology would be compartmentalized, classified at the highest levels, and restricted to a small number of authorized personnel. This creates a problem for verification. If time travel is classified, there will be no public demonstrations, no congressional hearings, no freedom of information requests that yield results. The only evidence would be leaks, accidents, or individuals who travelled and chose to speak. John Taita fits this profile. He claimed to be a soldier on a sanctioned mission. He was not a rogue traveller or a whistleblower. He was operating, he said, within established protocols. His mission had specific parameters. He was retrieving a computer, visiting family, and observing the past. If the story were true, this is exactly how a controlled disclosure might occur. Not through official channels, which would be too risky, but through an individual who shared information in a format that was deniable. Internet forums in 2000 were perfect for this. They were obscure, loosely moderated, and easily dismissed as fiction. Taita's posts could be acknowledged without confirmation. Officials could dismiss them as creative writing. No investigation would be required. No resources would be allocated. The information would remain in the public domain, accessible to anyone curious enough to look but never validated. This approach provides plausible deniability. If questions arise, the answer is simple. It was a hoax, an elaborate internet story, entertainment, nothing more. But what if it was not? The strategic value of plausible deniability is immense. Information can be shared without risk. If the information proves useful to certain parties, it can be acted upon. If it proves inconvenient, it can be ignored. The source can be discredited without effort because the source has already discredited itself by claiming to be a time traveller. This is the perfect cover for a leak. It is information hiding in plain sight, protected by its own implausibility. Consider the alternative. If time travel exists and is classified, how else would information escape? Through official channels? Unlikely. Governments do not voluntarily disclose their most sensitive technologies. Through whistleblowers? Possible, but risky. Whistleblowers face prosecution, surveillance, and retaliation. An anonymous post on an obscure forum claiming to be from a time traveller would be dismissed immediately by most people. But it would also be preserved, archived, and accessible. It would enter the public consciousness without triggering a response from authorities. It would be the perfect method for getting information out without getting caught. Silence in this context is not evidence of absence. It is evidence of control. Governments that possess advanced technology do not announce it. They use it quietly, deny its existence publicly, and allow speculation to fill the void. The lack of official response to the Titer case is consistent with this model. No agency has investigated, no official has commented. The story remains in the realm of internet folklore, never quite debunked, never quite confirmed, and perhaps that is exactly the point. Chapter 9. The evidence that cannot be unseen. When all elements of the John Titor case are examined together, a pattern emerges that resists simple explanation. The individual components can be questioned, but the totality presents a more complex picture. The IBM 5100 claim is the most concrete piece of evidence. Titor stated years before public confirmation that the computer had an undocumented feature allowing it to emulate older programming languages. This was later verified by engineers who worked on the project. The probability of guessing this detail without insider knowledge is low. Skeptics propose that Titor had connections to IBM or to vintage computing communities where such information might have circulated informally. This is plausible, but it requires assumptions about access and motive that are not supported by evidence. If Titor had such connections, why use them for an elaborate internet hoax? What was the incentive? The technical knowledge displayed in Titor's post was consistent with real physics. His references to Kerr black holes, frame dragging, and the many worlds interpretation were accurate. He did not invent pseudoscience. He applied legitimate theoretical frameworks to speculative technology. This level of accuracy requires either formal education in physics or extensive self-study. It is not impossible for a hoaxer to possess such knowledge, but it raises questions about intent. Why invest significant effort into creating a scientifically accurate hoax that would only be appreciated by a small audience of physics enthusiasts? The timeline of Titor's activity is also significant. He appeared in late 2000, before social media existed. He posted on niche forums where visibility was limited. He did not seek viral attention. He did not attempt to monetize the story during his active period. This is inconsistent with typical hoax behavior, which tends to seek maximum exposure and profit. His departure was clean. He left without fanfare, without attempting to extend the story, and without providing final proof. Most hoaxers struggle with endings. They either escalate to maintain interest or collapse under scrutiny. Titor did neither. He simply stopped posting, as if completing a task and moving on. The consistency of his voice across hundreds of posts over 5 months is difficult to maintain. He answered technical questions, engaged with skeptics, and described daily life in his time without contradiction or escalation. This requires discipline and planning that seems excessive for a prank. The predictions Titor made were mixed. Some failed, some were vague, but some aligned with later events in ways that are difficult to dismiss entirely. His descriptions of political polarization, institutional distrust, and social fragmentation have become increasingly accurate over time. None of this proves time travel. It does not even strongly suggest it. But it challenges the assumption that the case is easily explained. A hoax of this quality would require significant resources, knowledge, and restraint. It would require access to information that was not widely available, and it would require a motive that remains unclear. The alternative explanations all have weaknesses. The collaborative project theory requires coordination among multiple individuals who never came forward. The IBM insider theory requires motive and access that were never demonstrated. The physics enthusiast theory requires expertise and effort that seem disproportionate to the outcome. What remains is a pattern. Information that appeared too early, technical details that matched reality, a framework that anticipated later developments, and a disappearance that left no loose ends. The evidence does not compel belief, but it does compel attention. Chapter 10. If time travel is real. Assume, for the sake of exploration, that time travel is not only theoretically possible but practically achieved. What would such a reality look like? How would it manifest? And most importantly, how would it remain hidden? The first principle is secrecy. Any government or organisation possessing time travel technology would classify it at the highest level. It would not be shared with allies. It would not be acknowledged in budget documents. It would not be discussed in congressional hearings or public forums. The compartmentalisation would be absolute. Personnel with access would be limited. Missions would be highly specific, with narrow objectives and strict protocols. Time travellers would not wander freely through history. They would be sent to retrieve specific objects, verify specific information, or observe specific events. Deviation from mission parameters would be prohibited. Communication protocols would be carefully controlled. Travellers would not be allowed to make dramatic announcements. They would not contact media. They would not attempt to influence major historical events. Any interaction with the past or present would be conducted with minimal footprint. If a traveller wanted to leave a trace, they would need to do so in a way that was deniable. An anonymous internet post presented as speculative fiction or creative writing would be ideal. It would allow information to enter the public domain without triggering official response. It would be dismissed by most as entertainment while remaining accessible to those curious enough to investigate. This is precisely the model John Titor followed. Whether intentional or coincidental, his approach aligns with how a controlled disclosure might occur. Information was shared, details were provided, questions were answered, but nothing was provable. The story remained in the liminal space between fact and fiction. If time travel operates according to the many worlds model Titor described, travellers would have even less incentive to prove their claims. Any attempt to convince people in a destination timeline would be futile, because it would not benefit their origin timeline. They could share information, but they could not save their own world by doing so. This creates a strange ethical landscape. A time traveller could warn about future disasters, but those warnings would only help alternate timelines. Their own timeline would remain on its predetermined path. The only logical reason to share information would be curiosity, documentation, or a sense of obligation to other versions of humanity. Titor exhibited this fatalism in his posts. When asked why he did not try harder to convince people or prevent tragedies, he explained that it would not change his timeline. He could affect this world line, but not his own. His mission was retrieval, not intervention. This attitude felt authentic. It lacked the urgency of most time travel narratives. There was no ticking clock, no world to save, just a task to complete and information to share with people who might or might not believe it. If time travel is real, the present is not private. Every moment, every decision, every conversation could potentially be observed by individuals from the future. History would not be sealed. It would be permeable, accessible to those with the technology to reach it. This has profound implications. It means the past is not fixed in the sense of being unobserved. It means that records, documents, and events could be verified or retrieved by future historians with unprecedented accuracy. It means that lies, cover-ups, and hidden truths could eventually be exposed, not by contemporary investigators, but by travellers from centuries ahead. It also means that the present could be monitored. Future governments could send observers to key moments in history, watching events unfold, gathering intelligence, and understanding the long-term consequences of decisions. These observers would blend in. They would not announce themselves, they would simply watch. Titor claimed that time travel was used this way in his era. Missions were launched to observe historical events, retrieve lost information, and verify records. The technology was not used frivolously. It was too dangerous and too valuable, but it was used strategically, for purposes that benefited the origin timeline even if they could not change it. If this is true, the implications are staggering. It means we are not alone in time. It means the future is watching. And it means that the evidence of that observation might already be here, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. Chapter 11. Patterns across decades. The John Titor case did not emerge in a vacuum. It is part of a broader pattern of temporal anomalies that have appeared throughout history, each raising similar questions about information that seems displaced in time. In the 1920s, inventor Nikola Tesla described technologies that would not be realized for decades. He spoke of wireless energy transmission, concepts that foreshadowed modern attempts at wireless power transfer. He described devices that could photograph thoughts, predating brain-computer interfaces. He mentioned the possibility of communicating with other planets, a concept that seemed absurd at the time, but is now within the realm of serious scientific discussion. Was Tesla a time traveller? No credible evidence suggests this, but his ability to envision technologies far ahead of his time demonstrates that exceptional foresight is possible. The question is always whether such foresight comes from genius, from extrapolation, or from something else entirely. In 1945, the science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke published a technical paper describing the use of geostationary satellites for global communication. At the time, satellites did not exist. Rockets barely existed. The idea seemed fantastical. By the 1960s, his vision was reality. Clarke was not a time traveller. He was an engineer and writer who understood physics and extrapolated brilliantly. But Clarke's accuracy raises an important point. Accurate prediction is possible. The challenge is distinguishing between prediction and foreknowledge. Titor's case becomes interesting not because prediction is impossible, but because certain specific details seem to exceed the boundaries of reasonable extrapolation. In the 1950s and 60s, military projects explored concepts that sound like science fiction. Project Blue Book investigated UFO sightings. The Stargate project studied remote viewing. The Philadelphia experiment, though likely a myth, captured public imagination with claims of teleportation and time manipulation. These projects, whether real or exaggerated, demonstrate that governments have invested in research at the edges of known science. If time travel research occurred, it would fit this pattern. It would be classified, compartmentalized, and surrounded by disinformation. The public would hear rumours. Some would be true, most would be false. The truth would be buried in a mixture of fact and fiction, making verification nearly impossible. In the 1980s, a man named Al Bielek claimed to have participated in time travel experiments as part of a secret government project. He described being sent to the year 2049 and witnessing a devastated Earth. His claims were never verified. Most researchers dismissed them as fabrication or delusion. But Bielek's story shares structural similarities with Titor's: government involvement, specific missions, and descriptions of a troubled future. The difference is in the details. Bielek's account lacks the technical specificity of Titor's. It contains contradictions and dramatic elements that feel more like storytelling than reporting. Titor's account, by contrast, was measured, consistent and procedural. In the two thousands, after Titor disappeared, others began claiming time travel experiences. None achieved the same level of credibility. Most were quickly debunked or ignored. This suggests that if Titor was a hoax, it was an unusually sophisticated one. If he was genuine, subsequent claimants were either frauds capitalizing on his fame or less skilled travellers. The pattern across these cases is inconsistent. Some involve genuine prediction, some involve fraud, some remain unexplained, but taken together, they suggest that the idea of temporal displacement has captured human imagination persistently and across cultures. Titor's case stands apart not because it proves time travel, but because it resists the easy categorization that applies to other cases. It is not obviously fraud, it is not obviously genius prediction. It occupies a middle space that invites investigation while refusing resolution. Chapter 12. The technology that might exist if we accept, for the sake of argument, that time travel is theoretically possible under the laws of physics. What would the technology actually look like? And is there any evidence that such technology is being developed? The physics of time travel, as understood today, relies on solutions to Einstein's field equations that allow for closed time-like curves. These solutions exist under specific conditions, such as near-rotating black holes, within wormholes stabilized by exotic matter. or in spacetimes with unusual topologies. The Kerr metric, describing rotating black holes, is the most well-known solution. As Tito described, a Kerr black hole has properties that theoretically allow for time travel. An object entering the ergosphere could, under certain conditions, emerge at a different point in time. The challenge is creating and controlling such an environment on a scale that allows for human travel. Micro-black holes, which Titer claimed were generated by his device, are theoretically possible. The Large Hadron Collider at CERN was partially designed to test whether such black holes could be created in high-energy particle collisions. None have been detected, but theoretical models suggest they could exist if extra dimensions of space are real. Creating stable micro-black holes and using them for time travel would require technologies far beyond current capabilities. It would require exotic matter with negative energy density, a concept that exists in quantum field theory but has never been produced in macroscopic quantities. It would require containment systems capable of managing gravitational forces that could otherwise tear apart any surrounding structure. Yet research continues in these areas. Experiments with Casimir effects, quantum field manipulation, and high-energy physics push the boundaries of what is understood. If time travel technology were being developed, it would likely emerge from research in these fields. Governments do not typically announce breakthroughs in strategic technologies. The development of nuclear weapons occurred in secret. Stealth aircraft were operational for years before public acknowledgement. Surveillance technologies exist that are only revealed through leaks or declassification decades later. If time travel were achieved, it would follow this pattern. Development would occur in classified programs. Testing would be conducted in secure locations. Operational use would be limited to specific missions with strict controls, and public knowledge would be managed through denial and disinformation. Titer's description of his temporal displacement unit included elements that are consistent with theoretical requirements. He mentioned particle accelerators, magnetic containment, gravitational sensors, and cooling systems. These are not invented components. They are real technologies used in high-energy physics. The scale he described, a device weighing approximately 500 pounds that could fit in a vehicle, is extraordinarily ambitious. Current particle accelerators are massive, occupying kilometres of underground tunnels. Miniaturization to the extent Titer described would require breakthroughs in superconducting materials, energy density and field containment. But breakthroughs occur. Technologies that seem impossible become practical. In 1945, the idea of a computer fitting in your pocket would have seemed absurd. In 1960, the idea of global instant communication through handheld devices would have been science fiction. Today, both are mundane. If time travel research has been ongoing since the mid-20th century, as some conspiracy theories suggest, then by 2038, significant advances could have occurred. Titer's device, implausible by 2000 standards, might be achievable by future standards. The absence of public evidence does not mean the technology does not exist. It means, at most, that it has not been publicly acknowledged. And if strategic considerations demand secrecy, public acknowledgement might never occur. Epilogue. The future watching the past. In the decades since John Titer's final post, the internet has transformed. Social media platforms have billions of users. Information spreads instantly. Anonymity is increasingly difficult. And yet, the Titer case endures. Researchers continue to analyse his posts. New generations discover the story and attempt their own investigations. Theories proliferate. Some believe they have solved the mystery. Others insist it remains unsolvable. The conversation never quite ends. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case is not what Titer said, but what he represents. If time travel is real, the future is not a distant abstraction. It is a place populated by people who can reach back and interact with us, subtly and deniably. Every word written online is archived, every decision documented, every pattern recorded. If travellers from the future can access these archives, they can study us with precision that no contemporary observer could match. They can understand our mistakes, our innovations, our moments of crisis and triumph. And if they chose to leave messages, those messages would likely look like fiction. They would be buried in forums, dismissed as creative writing, ignored by most and studied by a few. They would be information hiding in plain sight, protected by their own implausibility. Tita claimed that in his time travel was known but not publicised. It was a tool used by governments and militaries for specific purposes. Travellers blended in. They did not announce themselves. They completed their missions and returned home. If this is true, we are not alone in time. We are observed, documented, and possibly influenced in ways we do not recognise. The past is not sealed. The present is not private. And the future is not unknowable. The evidence for this is not conclusive. It is suggestive. It is a pattern of details that do not quite fit, information that arrives too early, and explanations that resist simple dismissal. John Tita may have been a hoax, a skilled writer with access to obscure information and a talent for consistency. A project by multiple collaborators who never broke ranks. An exercise in creative fiction that happened to align with later events through coincidence. Or he may have been exactly what he claimed, a soldier from 2038, sent back to retrieve a computer, who chose to share information with a small online community before returning to his own time. The evidence does not compel a conclusion, but it does compel consideration. The future does not need us to believe it. It only needs us to notice it. And if time travel is real, the proof is already here. We just have to decide whether we are ready to see it.